Yeah, I'll just text you.
Just because
Yeah.
I know I gave him the
Yeah, so it was.
I'm gonna be in Ireland. This is actually something big in August. That was like years coming. That one you don't want to call it. Right. That's the last chapter. I caught it. I know. Yeah, this is interesting. It's good.
It's actually called preparation.
Okay, everyone. I have 6 o'clock, so time to start the meeting. So welcome everybody to the West Goshen Township Board of Supervisors meeting for July 19, 2022. To start the meeting, will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, thank you. Please be aware this meeting is being live streamed on the Township YouTube channel, and also the meeting may be audio or video recorded by people present in the room. As per our recent change, we start the meetings now with our public comment. So, is there anyone here who would like to raise an issue or ask a question of the board or staff on an item that is not on the agenda? Margie.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Margie Swarton. A couple quick questions. Do you know offhand, and this might be more directed towards staff if they know the answer, does the employee policy handbook include a whistleblower type clause?
What are you referring to?
Well, in previous meetings over the years, I mentioned that employees reach out to me, and I've had an employee in the past say, geez, I wish I could talk to you, but they were worried. I interpreted that as they felt like they couldn't talk to me because their job might be in jeopardy if they told me something. And just a couple weeks ago, I had an employee reach out to me, and I just don't feel like I'm the correct source of employees that have concerns about things that are happening here at the township. So I was just curious if it's made clear in township policy that they would not be retaliated against, or if they have a complaint, is it laid out in the employee handbook, you know, where they take their complaint to?
I'm sure it is.
I believe it is.
Okay. And then another thing I've brought up in the past, and I noticed on East Goshen's website, they're now also Zooming their meetings. Just makes it a little easier for those that want to participate from home if they have a way to speak to the board. YouTube, we've come a long way in some transparency with these meetings, but with the recent events and everything, I just think Zoom would be an easy transition. Sometimes with YouTube, the microphones aren't being used, so when you listen back to it, you really can't hear what people are saying, and just would like your consideration of maybe changing the format of the availability for those at home. Make it easier to participate. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Margie. Is there anyone else with any public comments this evening? Very good. We're ready to start the first order of business tonight, which is the 2021 financial audit review for West Goshen Township. I believe we have a representative here from Barbicane, Edmund Laurier. Did I get that right, Edmund?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. And you have a presentation for us, I believe.
Thank you very much. So as Sean mentioned, I'm Edmund Fosulaye. I'm from Barbicane Thornton & Company. I'm standing in for Steve Kutsuflakis, who is the partner on engagement. He's unfortunately out sick today. So I'm here to do the presentation on his behalf. All right. So we have a short PowerPoint presentation prepared tonight. Just to give you a summary of the audit results of all the entities that we performed the audit for the year ended December 31st, 2021. Is it?
No, you have to do it.
Oh, you got it? Okay, all right. So if we could go to the... All right. So just to give you a brief overview of the entities that we audited and the financial statements that we looked at for the year. We did a township audit, which was done on the U.S. Generally Accepted Accounting Principles. We did the township DCED filing, which was a regulatory basis filing. We also looked at the sewer and the sewer reserve fund, the police, the sewer and the uniform pension funds, the sewer authority, and the tax collector financial statements. So pretty much all the entities that are related to the township, we did the audit on. So looking at the timing, we did preliminary field work in January of this year. On-site field work was in late March, and the final report was issued in June. It is important to note that you met the DCD filing of April 1st and the authority filing of June 30th. So all the Pennsylvania filing deadlines were met for the current year. So next we'll look at the standards that were applied for the audits that we did. Just going through quickly, the standards followed were auditing standards generally accepted in the United States of America. The format and information included in the audit report changed a little bit. It was pretty much just a reorganization of how the opinion looks like. So if you look in the report that you have, you see that the opinion just looks different from previous years, but the fundamental message is the same. It was maintained. The report was just to make it clear of what our responsibilities are and what management's responsibilities are under the standards. All right, so as you can see, I jumped the gun, but as you can see, so management is responsible for the financial statements. They're also responsible for implementing internal controls in the preparation and the fair presentation of the financial statements. Our responsibility as auditors is to conduct an audit to obtain reasonable assurance that the financial statements were fairly presented in accordance with the basis of accounting that we did. So I would like to note that we issued unmodified opinions on all the reports, meaning we issued clean opinions on the financial statements. All the statements that I've mentioned, touched on in the previous slide, each of them got modified opinions. Also very important to note is that there were no significant deficiencies or material weaknesses noted in internal controls over the financial reporting model. And on a couple of slides coming up, as part of the process, we do review internal controls to make sure they're operating effectively as you have them documented, right? Because you might have instances where you have controls documented, but they're not being followed. But in this case, that wasn't the case. There weren't any material weaknesses or deficiencies noted based on the audit that we did. So quickly, just to give you an overview too, we want to look at the audit approach, just to give you an idea of what we do when we come in, and this is just a summarized version. So the audit is a risk-based audit approach. We do the risk assessment, and then based on the risk assessment, we perform our procedures to ensure that we're mitigating the risk, or we're touching on the areas that we feel that there's substantial risk. And the risk assessment includes, inquiries with individuals at various levels of management. We also do interview any of the supervisor, when we come in as well. We also do analytical procedures. If there are any large variances from year to year, we look at all those, as part of our audit procedures as well. We do also review the minutes. As you know, the minutes has a lot of information, vital information. When you're doing an audit, when you come in at the end of the year, we have to look at the minutes for the whole year just to see if there are any major things that happen during the year that will impact, how we perform our audit. So that's a very vital part of what we do. Obviously we look at contracts and agreements. As you know, contracts, agreements, all those things impact how, the audit is done. If there are any things, making sure they're recorded correctly in your financial statements. So those are all part of the things that we look at. Aside from the numbers, those are things that you also have to look at just to give you a holistic picture of what happened during the year that we're looking at. We also do substantive procedures, meaning, example, we confirm your cash balances with third parties. We also confirm your revenues with third parties, review your bank records and make sure they're being done right, as well. So, as much as we use internal documentation that's prepared, we also confirm with external parties just to make sure it aligns with, the information that you have internally. All right. So now we jump to the numbers, right? And as you all know, fund balance at the end of the year is, that number is what people look at to say, okay, how did we do during the year, right? So we'll look at the governmental funds, So as I mentioned, fund balance is pretty much the resources available, to use for future years. And looking at your general fund, which is the biggest fund that you have, your fund balance increased by $1.2 million comparing 2020 and 2021, all right? And $13.9 million of your $17.6 million in fund balance was unassigned, meaning that it wasn't assigned for any specific purposes. It can be used for general operations as deemed necessary by management and the supervisors. So your capital reserve fund, which is your other governmental fund, also increased by $680,000. It is important to know that there was a $3.1 million transfer from the general fund to the capital reserve fund to fund capital projects in the township. So overall, revenues that came in, including the transfer, exceeded your capital outlay expenditures for the year as well. So during the current year, as you all know, we got some CARES funding, the American Rescue Planning Fund. That's a new fund implemented this year. You did receive, I think, a total of $2.4 million, and you did receive half of it, so $1.2 million came in 2021. You, however, did not use those funds yet, so they've been deferred on your financial statements for use in future years. And on my last slide, but I'll jump to it now. Because this is federal funding, there's a potential that you're going to have a single audit this next year. All that means is that you did receive over $750,000 in federal funds, so you have to do additional federal compliance testing to make sure you're in compliance with federal requirements, and that will probably be for 2022. But for this year, because the funds were not used, you didn't meet that threshold. So jumping on, we'll look at the budget. Obviously the budget is a very good tool, to see, how much revenues are coming in, expenditures going out. For 2021, revenues exceeded the budget by $3.5 million. And the line items that realized higher revenues were real estate transfer taxes, and income taxes, and charges for services, building permits. Meaning that there was a lot of, construction going on in the township that was budgeted for. Expenditures were also under budget by $1.2 million. And as I mentioned previously, there was a budget transfer of $3 million from the general fund to the capital reserve fund to fund capital projects during the year. Okay. Now we'll look at your proprietary funds, and these are your sewer, the authority, and the wish recycling funds. So as you can see, in 2021, the sewer and the sewer reserve fund had a fund balance net position of $5.6 million. The authority had a net position of $31.5 million. And then in 2020, it was pretty close. If you look at the sewer and the sewer reserve, 5.4, $30 million, and 1.8. So there wasn't a lot of movement in your proprietary funds during the year. Also, the township has 3 pension plans, and I want to touch on them quickly to give you an idea of where your pension funding stands. The police pension plan was funded at 117%, resulting in a net pension asset of $3.7 million, meaning you're meeting your obligations, because of the performance of the market, and the contributions that are being made. It's fully funded, and actually it's 117%, so that's a good plan right there. The non-uniform pension plan is funded at 91%, resulting in a net pension liability of $1.2 million. And the sewer plan is at 99%, resulting in a net liability of $85,000. Also important, the township met all the required payments into the pension plan during the year. So your MMO, everything that the township was required to contribute to the plan were done as needed. You also do have other post-employment benefits, and that has a $6 million liability in the current year compared to $5 million in the current year, in the prior year, sorry. It is currently not being funded. It's not a trust arrangement. It's a pay-as-you-go plan, unlike the pensions that are funded, yearly. All right. So a few required communications touch points to the supervisors. There were no disagreements with management or difficulties incurred during the audit process. Everything that we requested from management, any support and documentation were provided to us, and we're able to get the audit done. There were great entries related to accrued payroll and accrued interest on net. There were no material audit entries, which is a testament to the internal controls you have in place. There's segregation in your internal controls. Everybody's doing, what you're supposed to do. There's review process in the posting of entries and everything. So there weren't any material adjustments that we had to make to get the numbers fairly presented during the audit. We had cooperation from management and members of the staff. And the audit was reviewed with management in detail, and any questions were answered at that point as well. So just to touch base real quick, I believe I mentioned that because of the ARPA funds, you were subject to a single audit. I'm not going to go through this slide, because I already mentioned it in the previous. But just keep in mind that next year, with the funding of these funds, there will be an additional audit done in in addition to what was done this year, a single audit as well, just to make sure you're in compliance with what the funds were supposed to be used for. Yep. So that's a quick overview of the December 31st, 2021 audit results. And if there are any questions, I will take them at this time.
Thank you, Edmund. That was great. Really good, crisp summary there. So does the board have any questions, either on the presentation or on the details in these very large documents that we have related to the 2021 Township audits? I have a question for you, so I'll kick it off. Maybe they'll have some up for me. So the previous slide, if you just put it back up, that answered most of my questions. So it'll be the one before this one, Rick, if you can get to it. Yeah, that one. So that answers most of my questions relative to how the audit went and your view as an auditor of the financial management and the staff that are involved with the township finances. Do you feel that the accounting principles and approach used by the township is either overly conservative or aggressive on the other side? What is your view of that? Again, I'm not sure how much you were involved with the audit versus Stevens.
Right.
If it's not something you can answer, that's fine. But I thought I'd at least ask the question.
If we're looking at it from a control standpoint, and that I can answer that. We do review internal control. It's a major part of what we do. We do review the controls. We do walk through some all your major cycles, disbursements, payroll, revenue, to make sure that the procedures you have in place are what are in your policies and procedures. We do test actual controls. We'll pull invoices, make sure all the approvals, all the amounts that are being paid, vouchers, everything ties. So in terms of a control standpoint, there's good segregation here. You have enough employees that do areas that don't contradict with each other. So if there were any internal control related issues that we came across during the audit, we would have noted them either in the audit as significant deficiencies or material weaknesses, or in recommendations to management. But based on the results of the audit and reviewing the work papers before I came in, there were no internal control related issues that came to attention. So I would say from a government standpoint, if I would put it that way, you're doing what is required from an internal control standpoint, and it looks like the supervisors are providing management with enough employees to make sure that there's good internal controls and segregation from their standpoint, at least just based on my limited review of the audit.
So based on your understanding of the audit and the scope of the risk assessment that was done, when you think of your own experience and compare it to other municipal audits, how do we rate in relation to others of a similar sized township, if you have that to compare to?
I would mention that because we do, then again, internal controls, as I say, it's the founding block of everything that we do. If you don't have good internal controls, to me, everything else is doesn't work well. So good internal controls. You do have a lot of municipalities and townships your size that unfortunately do not have good internal controls, maybe just due to lacking, funding and not having enough employees to take on responsibilities. So in that instance, we find ourselves issuing findings, recommendations to improve internal controls. But Steve and his team, in reviewing your controls, if they did not have any issues relating to controls, then you are definitely, doing what is expected as well. Because, with the audit, even if it's not, something material and it's immaterial, we still do communicate with management and say, hey, look, we came across this and this, we think we should improve this, and this would be a better way to do it. But in this instance, that wasn't the case. So I would say we're doing that.
Okay, thanks.
Good job based on the audit.
Thank you. Boyd, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I think I have a question. It may be the same you asked, but maybe from a different angle. On page 17 of the audit here, it talks about the township historically generated revenues in excess of budgeted figures and contained expenditures below budget amounts year after year. And then, point positive to underscore that on page 34, which you referenced here, our original and final budget, we came up with a number. We go through this budget process every year. We figured a fund balance at the end of the year of $12,127,000, but the actual amount as a result of your budget came up to $17,591,000 with the difference of variance of $5.4 million, which to me is pretty significant. I mean, did we just miss the ball here when we developed our budget last year? Or was last year like a non-league coming out of COVID? Or is there some way we can sharpen our pencil to be more on target when we develop our budgets, you know, for the year that would follow when we develop that budget? And you have any suggestions how we might be able to do that?
And maybe Chris might want to jump in here as well. But 2021, I would say, you know, with additional funding that came in with COVID, that and then, you know, from an expenditure standpoint too, that might have affected, you know, the budgets as well. Not knowing, you know, or going into too much detail because I don't have all the information, I would say those are things that might have, you know, affected, you know, the budget to actual numbers for 2021 as well. But I'm sure, you know, and Chris might want to jump in, there's a review process when you're preparing the budgets, you know, and estimating, you know, assumptions as to what the year would be and all that. So if Chris might want to jump in with additional, you know, information on that as well.
I also think one of the reasons for the discrepancy are things that are realized in the subsequent year that are then accrued back to the previous year. So for example, at the end of 2021, we had 3 major property sales occur that elevated our real estate transfer tax revenue. While we didn't receive the money until 2022, those weren't realized on our budget projections. So when it was realized in 2022, it was accrued back to 2021, thus increasing the final balance. Same thing with our income tax revenue. So if we got a big shot of our income tax revenue at the beginning of 2022, but it was for December of 2021, it was accrued back to the previous year.
Does that happen on a regular basis throughout the year?
Throughout the year, it could. It's hard to predict, specifically with real estate transfer tax. It is hard to predict because we can't really project, you know, if we're going to have like an industrial complex sell, or like we had 2 of the large apartment complexes sell in relatively close proximity to each other at the end of 2022. So those things can't really be predicted.
Okay, go ahead.
So I see it's on page 25 that the township was assigned a AA+ rating for bond debt issuances. So I guess my question is, what is the highest? Is it AAA+ in New Jersey? How is that rating decided upon for us? And is there anything that we can do to improve our rating?
I think it's just AAA. I don't think there's a plus assigned to it. I think it's just AAA. I don't know all the parameters, but I do know that there are very few municipalities with a AAA rating.
Yeah.
I think Chester County is one of the AAA rated counties.
So we're 1 tier below.
Right.
Yeah, and the U.S. government.
Yeah.
So how do you get the AAA?
I really don't know. I can't answer that
To do with
question.
the amount of debt that they have, is that like
Right, a lot of things come into play,
Yeah.
but that's for the one guys, you know. that's outside of mine.
Other questions from the board on the audit?
I have one question. You're referring to the internal control, you're talking
Yes.
about how good our internal controls are compared to other municipalities. I'm assuming you're also talking about the sewer and all the other departments associated with it.
Correct.
Not just the township itself.
Not just the township. So yes, holistically correct. Yeah. Yeah.
Any other questions? Are there any public questions or comments for Edmund? Doug?
Sometimes the differences between the projected fund balance and the actual fund balance, again, because we use accrual basis, it counts as when the transaction occurred, not when the money comes in.
Yeah, when the transaction.
So it's a little more complicated accrual, but it's more accurate.
Right.
Because it's a cash basis.
As opposed to cash basis, exactly.
So but because of government standards, you have to use accrual basis.
Accrual basis, yeah. Modified accrual, you know, basis, you know, because it's a governmental fund, and then those was a little complicated. So, yeah. It's a good point. Yeah.
Other questions? Margie?
Sure. On page 1 of the DCED report, the letter from Barbara King,
the adverse opinion.
Yes.
Could you explain that, please?
So on the DCD report, so pretty much all it's saying is that because we didn't follow GAAP, it's a regulatory basis report, we're not issuing, that report is nice like for general, distribution. And then, anybody, let's say you're going out for a bond issue, right? Because it's not GAAP, our opinion is that it's not GAAP, it's regulatory basis. And then we're issuing an adverse opinion on that as well. But
so as a resident, just reading this, when it says that the financial position of West Goshen Township as of December 31st, 2021, for the changes in financial position thereof for the year then ended. Anyway, you're basically saying that these numbers you don't have confidence in.
No, we're saying that it's based on the regulatory basis report. But if you look at the townships, the big report, even though they're the same numbers, that was done under generally accepted auditing standards, and then that opinion is unmodified. But because the DCD is a regulatory basis report and it's not under GAAP, it's under DCD reporting standards, that's why we're making it known that it's on a regulatory basis accounting pretty much. But it's not that we don't have confidence in. So if you read it, it says as other than that, all the numbers are good. I don't have the wording in front of me, but
okay, and then I just reviewed the shorter report, the DCED, and those numbers, just a more simplified version. And I was unable to find where the restricted parks numbers are. We have a little over $1 million of restricted parks.
You mean on the DCED report? Those don't, the DCED report doesn't show those amounts as restricted on there.
So where does that show? Is that part of?
Yeah, if you look at, let me pull this up here. Are you talking about the outside development fund?
I believe that's
Is
what
that-
you guys call it.
Which fund?
The restricted parks or open space.
What did you say? What did you?
Offsite development fund.
I
It's
don't
got
know.
to be, because you don't have a
Yeah.
traffic, a traffic fee, so that would be another thing. Not sure what to call that, but
Yeah, so.
that one I think that would be.
Yeah, those are the non-major funds. So if you look at on page 92.
No, it's on the DCE, the shorter report, the 30-page one.
Yeah, that on the DCE report, it will be grouped in this on the special revenue. Because on the special revenue, the DCE, there are a few accounts that will go in there: the state fund, the zoning hearing fund, and the offsite development fund. Those are all grouped under special revenue in the DCD report. So they are not shown individually. On the DCD report, you have to combine the funds based on the classifications that they provide to the DCD. So you can't directly pinpoint that on the DCD report. However, if you look at the main financial statements, it's all broken down in there. And that's where you get the information. Because the DCD report, if you look at it, that's just a regulatory basis. It's based on DCD groupings. But to get more information and better information, you do have to look at the main financial statements that are presented with the footnotes and everything. That's where you get your information from.
Okay. And then I've always wondered over the years when I'm looking at this DCED report,
Right.
And there's specific lines like for the legislative body, and we seem to just group all administrative salaries into the legislative body. We don't break it down, so there's a line item for township manager, but that is always left blank. And there's, I'm sorry, I don't have the page right there in front of me. But okay, page 12. So
elected officials, from my understanding, when I compare it to other municipalities. So, you know, and again, the executive or manager or mayor, we want that somewhere else, but we have an executive, so why isn't that broken down? I mean, again, I think it's just government transparency. You have all these lines, but then you're lumping numbers together, and that's discouraging to see where it could be more transparent.
Because that's beyond the detail that I have with me, I would have to look at that and touch base with Steve, and then I guess we can reach out to Chris and get back to you on those classifications and the breakdown, if that's okay with you.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
And then one last one. Chris mentioned this. So when I look at December 2021 Treasurer's Report, and it'll break down year-to-date the earned income tax, the real estate tax, and the realty transfer tax. Those numbers don't match up with year-end on here, and you did explain the accrual. But this is like $500,000 that there's a difference. So when we're looking at the budget every year, like what are we going off of? What was the year-end Treasurer's Report, or now it shows a completely different number on the audited reports?
So let me try to answer some of that. So first of all, your question about the difference on the DCD report. You do understand there's a big difference between where the audit reports against some regulatory requirement on the DCD and the use of that specific auditor type language like adverse. It just means it's not compatible with that type of report. So that was the answer to that one. On the budget process and the numbers, as you know, we've got a line item budget that's more transparency than you'll ever find in this. These audits will all roll up the numbers to a kind of macro level view so that you can see the overall financial health of the township. And the real purpose of the audit is to test whether our accounting and our internal controls are doing the right things with all the ins and outs of the checks and the payments and everything else. That's the purpose of the audit, to get the opinion that we're doing it in a controlled, manageable way. When it comes to transparency of figures, it's all about the budget process. Every salary grouping, every department, it's all there with all those line items that we spend hours talking about that you have the chance to be, critique the township or ask for the transparency on. These audit reports, trying to tie everything together is really the job of the accountants and auditors. Okay, so any other questions for Edmund? Thank you very much. We appreciate you standing in for Steve, and we thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Okay, next up on the agenda is item number 5, which is discussion and interim report presentation from HRG regarding the corrugated metal pipe analysis that is underway in the township. And Sean Fabian from HRG is here. Welcome, Sean.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to be in person this time around. It's a little bit different when you're on Zoom and aren't in the room to get to interact with everybody. So I'm really happy to be able to come in today. I was hoping to have a more complete report, but we just received a second package of additional videos to audit. So kind of what I have in the mapping right now is that first data package that we received to review. So anybody that's not familiar with the project, we have a number of feet of corrugated metal pipe in the township that I believe it was Army Corps went around and did camera pole videos of all the assets and needed somebody to evaluate and interpret that data and figure out how do we classify the state of all of this infrastructure so that we know what's in desperate need of repair, what's in need of repair soon, and what still has serviceable life to it, so that we can try and interpret some of the assumptions we have and what we've been seeing with some of the repairs that have been happening with the township with actual data that we can make decisions on. So part of the job of my team has been trying to take this data from these downloaded videos and the correlating spreadsheet and pull it into a GIS database that we can then sort through and graphically show some of these items. The map is a little on the large scale at the township level, but being in GIS, we can zoom in and gain a lot more detail as you look at each of these individual areas. So the first snapshot is a visual representation in the yellow of kind of the first data package of 1,000 videos that we were able to review. So a lot of the videos, we kind of are restricted to the information that was gained. It wasn't a closed circuit TV on a remote vehicle that was able to drive through and look at it close up. So on your shorter runs of pipe, you have a lot better detail when they zoom in and zoom out of the state of the pipe. A lot of your longer runs, it becomes a little bit more difficult to see what the middle of that pipe is looking like. But we tried to break everything down in the assessment into 3 main qualities of the pipe. How bad is it rusted out? Does it have any deformation or crushing? And how much sediment or deposits you have in there, so you know if I don't have a rusted pipe, I don't have any kind of crushing, but there's a large amount of sediment, that might be a pipe that we could flush and still have serviceable life out of, whereas something that's rusted but it hasn't deformed yet, we might be able to have as a candidate for slip lining so that we can try and categorize. So a lot of the initial capital improvement planning was done on assumptions of the overall assets, and I'm providing then input into that analysis after we're complete with this second package of videos on what the true state of infrastructure is from all the videoing that we've been able to conduct so far. So I do work hand in hand with the financial services group providing those inputs. I don't do a lot of the data analysis that they do on the financial projections and models and things like that, but I have worked with stormwater fees and stormwater utilities in the past. So hopefully, as you have questions, if I'm unable to answer them here, I can take notes and follow back up in the near future on any of the questions that you have. But one of the things that I was trying to do, if you show in the next map, is pull in some colors on, what is the state? Green good, yellow is getting bad, red's pretty bad. And this is similar to what a lot of folks do with their PCI ratings on roadway infrastructure management, to give us a sense of what is an imminent risk of failure, what is starting to age, and what do we have at least a serviceable life from, so that we can do projections on the life we should get out of the pipe and what we need to focus our efforts on replacement for.
Rick, could you zoom in a little bit, just pick one area and zoom in a little closer on it, please?
Top left.
Because all this data is in GIS, we're able to make different maps, different colors, whatever is going to work out for those different criteria I was explaining, to get a sense of, where do we have the most rusted out pipes, where do we have crushed pipes, where do we have other information. So the fact that this is in GIS, we'll be able to then transfer that entire GIS database back to the township after the evaluation is done. I'm a personal fan of managing these large infrastructure projects with GIS over a spreadsheet, just because of that ability to kind of sort through, bring to the top issues and focus in on them.
So the yellow is where they replaced a portion of the piping.
The yellow is showing us that we either are starting to have rust where you're getting pinholes, or you have deformation enough that the pipe's starting to crush, so we might have 80% of the original carrying capacity on the circle instead of 100% on it. Or it may have an issue where there's a large buildup of sediment. So sometimes over time, you'll have a sag in the line, and that prevents water from flowing through and carrying solids through, and you'll start to collect solids where your capacity in the pipe starts to become restricted. So this is a base sum of all 3 of those issues. So the red have the highest ratings in all those 3 categories.
Well, for areas that are identified as red, they could have a lot of rusting to the point where they're falling apart. You could have poor structural integrity, the same thing basically, or a lot of deposits. Are you able to identify which of those 3 factors the red is?
We can in the database. Yeah.
I mean, that may determine what the solution would be for that particular piece of pipe.
And that's why I tried to divide it into 3 different categories, because I was trying to think ahead on how this data is going to be used.
Right.
So, I would want to know, if I was running the program, what can I just flush out and it's fine again?
Right.
What could I slip line that it hasn't been crushed to the point that I've lost the carrying capacity in the pipe, and then be able to look at those in different snapshots, and also to try and get a sense of where are the worst spots that we should focus on first. And then, to your point, we've also had a little bit more granular data that we've been collecting on kind of the level of impairment. So we went on a 5-point scale where 5 on a rust, we could have no bottom at all. The whole pipe is completely rusted through. A 5 on deformation is a completely crushed pipe where you probably don't even have 20% capacity carrying in the pipe anymore. So in the areas that we have in red, those are the highest scoring across those 3 different criteria.
So where the obstructions would be, would that be in a yellow you would classify that?
We can make it whatever color we want. So we can actually take, because it's in a GIS, you can highlight the various columns and say, I want to know where all the worst pipes are for sediment deposits. So then we can create a flushing program. Correct. Yeah, so this is just an aggregate, but we can then further break the data down because it's in GIS to create whatever map we may need to highlight what we want to see from the data.
Which is important because your cost is going to prompt what you're going to do as far as...
And it will change over time. So one of the things I wanted to build is, we're going to continue, I would assume, to have some type of videoing and information coming back. So we know, are the repairs we're making effective? Are we increasing the rating overall? Similar to how you manage a roadway plan. I have a failing road, I'm going to plan to repave it, I'm going to watch it over time to see what the serviceable life is. Is it what I expected? Could have I done different treatments to get better results so that we have data coming in over time to help inform the decision, so we're making the best decision to spend money appropriately to fix the issues that exist that give you the best longevity that you can from the structure.
So in this example, would we just handle the red first, and we're going to prioritize it, and then go back and do the yellow?
They're your
and
worst
then
areas,
green,
correct.
Versus here I am in this area, let me cover the corrosion, the collapse, and sediment, and also, okay, so you would just handle red first.
That's most likely going to be the recommendation. So when I'm complete with the evaluation, so as I said, we had a package of about 1,000 videos to evaluate. So if you think about, we're in an inlet, I have 3 different pipes out of it, I have a video for each of those to review through. So we just got a packet of 1,000 more. So we finished our evaluation of the new packet. We haven't uploaded all that into GIS yet to have final packages of all the data with, then we can make recommendations off of that data. And at that point, when we have everything together, it would be a good time to sit down with staff and kind of understand what would be the best way to present these, what would be the most useful way to have this data that we can then continue to add information to over the life of the program so that we can continue to update. Because one of the restrictions we have in the data, each of the videos, we have bound to a point GIS, so we know it's attached to that point in space. But we have no way to independently audit, was that correct? Is that really the state of the pipe? And there are a couple issues as you go through with some of these GIS databases of keeping up as things are replaced over time and updating the database. So, you have a couple pipes that were identified in the video 5 years ago that have since been, potentially replaced. So there's some validation that we'll probably do of the data before you actually start building what your capital improvement project's going to be and going out and physically putting out to bid, or if the Public Works Department's doing the replacements on the infrastructure. So there'll be a little bit of ground truthing on this on the back end, I would assume.
And your review is every 5 or 6 feet?
It's one camera, and then it zooms up and zooms back. So we can only see what we see in that. So if I have at a pipe connection where there's a separation, if I don't see sediment deposited from the video, I can't really see that like I can on a CCTV where I can actually turn the camera's lens up and view right next to it. So there are some limitations, but it's still good data. It's not like somebody just stood at the end and took a photo. It's a video of zoom in, zoom out, and it gives you an idea of the state of the infrastructure so we can kind of focus on where the larger problems are first.
Sure, it seems to me, again, help me with the concept here, but as I look at that, it looks like there's many, many sections that have issues. And it's hard for me to imagine, to visualize is that, a 100-foot run of a particular pipe, or is it 10 feet, and then there's a 80-foot section that's fine, and another 10 feet that's bad. What's the strategy around managing what needs to be done there? Can you help me understand, take this visual picture into what it means for a particular neighborhood and the stormwater system in that neighborhood? Does it mean every run of pipe is going to have some kind of issues based on this scattering of red we see on the visual?
Yeah, one of the things that I wanted to have happen with the data is I envision you're going to want to go back to the videos and review and see that you agree with the information there. So one of the things that we were trying to do, because it's not a CCTV run with the footage count where I can say this segment's good, this segment's bad, I can only make an assumption on that entire video. So that's where having a quick reference to go back, because the way everything was organized was, on this specific date, I took 17 videos, and there's a point reference to them. So it's not very user-friendly to go in and say, I want to see a video of this specific line. So part of what we have in our evaluation is now in the GIS, you can click, find out exactly where the video is to see the condition of that line, go back and then review it very easily. So hopefully that saves a lot of digging through and trying to reinterpret all the data that we were able to review.
And that'll give us how many feet are in the red.
We have in GIS the approximate footage in there. So we can find out about how many feet are in the red, how many feet are in the yellow, and give those types of breakdowns and summaries on the back end. And then I could do it by each of those three distinctions. So we can get a list of, this is how many, number 5, worst case, rust pipe segments that you have in the township.
How are you going to take the final data set? Because I believe the scope of work we have here is to do all this work, get this GIS mapping done, and then have an assessment of a project infrastructure improvement approach to deal with it. And list kind of the top 10 dozen priorities from what you've seen in terms of what's in the worst shape, how we can go about it. Is that right in terms of what you think the scope of work would be?
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. And we did some assumptions in the beginning, I guess, when they were building some of what the capital improvement plan would look like. So we assumed, of the 30,000 feet of corrugated metal pipe we were told you have, that maybe a third are in bad shape and maybe replaced. So I should be able to inform that number based on this.
From what you've done with this assessment so far, was it a reasonable assumption, or are you seeing a lot worse than that, or about 30% is kind of the red, or is the red different than the 30%?
From what I've looked at so far, I think, a quarter to a third was a fairly good assumption of probably what you have issues with. Until I'm done post-processing the additional videos that we've received, it's a little tough for me to give you an assumption of everything we have in hand because this assessment hasn't been completed yet.
How long do you think it's going to take to complete the assessment?
So we're done reviewing all the videos. So we've only had them for a couple weeks now. So the next thing my staff's going to do is take that assessment. So we kind of have a check and balance created that we have an Excel spreadsheet that Army Corps gave us with some of the point data. So we built some of the backup to the GIS database within that Excel spreadsheet. So that is populated. We just have to push it into GIS now. So I'm assuming that's probably going to take us another 3 or 4 weeks to populate everything up where now we have a full set of data.
And then from getting that full data set, how long before you pull together a planned program of work for review with staff and the board?
Yeah, I would like at that point to have some of my base recommendations so then we could sit down with staff and evaluate. So it should not take long after everything's populated to have some export of the data and the GIS database that we can start reviewing just to make sure that I'm not off base with what I'm trying to recommend, what I'm trying to pull together as recommendations that I'm aligning with what the staff's expectation is for that. But I would not envision that's going to be a long process after the data is complete.
Okay.
And as far as the red, from your engineering perspective, do we have a year, 2 years? I know it's hard to evaluate right now, not having, evaluated the section of pipe specifically for the red. I'm just wondering, is it a 2-year program until they actually collapse, or?
It's often hard to tell because I've had pipes in the municipality that I do most of the engineering for that have had no bottom for years, and then you get a very high gully washing event that holds the cement out and the whole thing collapses. So I've gotten way more life out of things I thought would fail immediately, and I've also had things that I thought were pretty stable. You have a massive rain event and you start getting pinholes in roads and things like that. So it is tough to tell because I get asked that about the corrugated metal piping in general. They're like, well, how long does it last?
Right.
I've put it in places where it lasted 5 years. I've put it in places where, 60 years later, it still sits there. It all depends how acidic, how often is it wet and dry. Like, there are things that will eat the pipe over time. So if you have a pretty basic flow through it and it's not acidic and eaten through, that can last a very long time. But I'll see what I can do for assumptions of, immediacy of action in it. Because some are definitely fail.
Right.
it's crushed, nothing's getting through it. So those are going to be kind of the immediate action, the first out the gate repairs that we'll want to do. And that's where that a third assessment came from, and I'd like to compare back to see how close is that to reality. Because when you visually look at it, it's looking pretty accurate, but I want to see the actual footages and recommendations from it. And then to get a sense, like, is this red because it's, you know, got less sediment and I can clean that out, now all of a sudden it's better. So that's something that this map doesn't really show too well. It's an aggregated score over those three criteria. So it has enough issues that are problematic that it most likely needs replaced.
And that's important to prioritize from that standpoint. Once you get that information, and then of course then you have your budget and money associated with remediation.
I have a quick question for you. Rick, do you mind zooming out again to show the whole map? So the colored parts, so all the blue lines are all of the piping that you're going to be looking at. Is that right?
So the blue lines, all the infrastructure in general. So some of those are plastic pipe.
That have already been
concrete.
replaced? Or
Just all the stormwater.
it's all the stormwater?
Yep. So this evaluation is focused more on just that aging corrugated metal pipe.
And where's that focused on the map? Is it what you've already looked at? Everything
Yeah, so
that's highlighted?
the
So
blue
you're
is
waiting
not
on
looked at at
data.
all. Everything highlighted has a video assigned and has been evaluated, except for this new batch of.
Yeah, so what's the new batch going to show you?
That's what I'd like to see, because right now it's a spreadsheet, so I don't really understand because they kind of jumped through the township as they were doing the videoing. It's hard for me to get a sense of where in the township certain things fall until I upload it all into the GIS database.
Okay.
Just to follow up, so all the blue there is not necessarily corrugated metal piping. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's my understanding. Or you haven't had it videoed yet. So I don't know how comprehensive Army Corps' initial videotaping of everything was, if they had a focus in select areas or went from oldest to the newest infrastructure. So there may be corrugated metal pipe that they had yet to video. So that's something I want to take a look at in the data and GIS as well.
Rick, do you have a feel for that? How much of this 2,000 videos is, how much of the 30,000 linear feet is covered in those 2,000 videos?
About 80%.
80%. This blue is more than just the CMP, right?
That's everything is there.
Other questions for Sean? Is there anyone in the audience, in the public, has a question for Sean?
Okay. So green is good, yellow's going bad, and red's bad. And blue is not like pipes that just, are we know there, we haven't looked at yet.
Well, tell the types of pipe though, too.
It could be.
Okay.
It could be other things.
It's just whatever's there. It could be any type, but we haven't looked at it yet.
And we do have in the GIS database information that's been collected by the GIS department to categorize that. So we probably could look up the information from it.
No, it's just when I first looked at this map, I guess the only thing that I wasn't understanding was that all of the blue lines, we're not necessarily going to be looking at all those blue lines. We're only looking. So I thought, looking at this, oh my gosh, I feel like we haven't looked at much, but really, we're focusing on certain ones. So.
Yes. Well, and that's one thing in building in GIS I was hopeful to do, that if this is a useful enough evaluation tool, then you can do a broader application to it over time to help manage the infrastructure. So I was trying to think forward, how would you use this information? How would we edit and keep it up to date? Because one of the challenges when you're dealing with large data sets like this is the second you find something that's no longer accurate, you start to doubt the integrity of the data. So it's something that will be maintained, kept up with. So that's one of the reasons we tried to build it off of the GIS system that currently exists here, so that it becomes a program that gets incorporated into the rest of the data. So if you have a new dedication of a subdivision with all their new infrastructure, that's something that would be pulled into the same database to manage it as a comprehensive utility.
Margie, you have a question?
Well, it's more directed at the board or staff. So I'm just trying to keep all these engineering firms straight. So we have the Army Corps of Engineer. So from what I recall, at least we engaged them for 3 consecutive years at $50,000 a year. And they were, I guess, just that engagement was for them to do all the video work. And then just a month or 2 or 3 ago, we had Carroll Engineering here with staff that came up with 16 different areas that were going to be a focus. But that stormwater focus with Carroll Engineer is different than this stormwater
Yes.
evaluation with Carroll.
Because those 16 areas, remember, had no stormwater controls at all. There wasn't any pipe to go and look at or touch. It was like, how do you improve stormwater flow where sheets of water are running across roads and into people's yards?
Right, so we're focusing on both.
Yes. Other questions?
So just one last question. You mentioned things are moving along pretty well. Do you have any idea when you think this report might be ready for review and consideration?
My hope is to have enough of the data pulled together that when you're going into planning for your budget, that you have this information in hand. So I'm pushing on staff right now to try and get this all uploaded so that we can do some of that evaluation, so that you have it in your hands here before we get too far into budget season here.
If I said September, would that
That's what I'm pushing for right now.
I was looking for that. And
Just a
I'm
couple
going to put
words.
that in writing by September. No.
And the reason I'm hesitant to give an actual date is I still have certain items that I'm
Sure.
trying to track down. So pretty much, when we evaluated the first pack of 1,000, there's 75 videos that weren't in that package. So I'm still trying to track those down. So I asked for them, they're like, oh, here's the additional videos. Well, I still don't have those 75, but now I have 1,000 new ones. So I'm just trying to make sure, do I have everything? Can I finalize recommendations? Can I finalize data? So that's part of my audit process. So I have a couple staff members doing the bulk assessment to make sure that everything's accurate. But I think right now, with how quickly we've gone through those videos and how they've been able to upload data in the past, that within the next month here, I should have everything comprehensive into this. And my hope is the effort in building the GIS database and the criteria makes that evaluation process a lot smoother, because that was my intent. How do I take 2,000 videos and make it something visually that you can zero in on, hey, this is where we have the problems.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you.
time this evening and your update. Very, very, very comprehensive. Thank you.
Appreciate the opportunity to talk with you.
Okay. So next on the agenda is item number 6, continued discussion and possible approval of a proposal from Carroll Engineering for a study of the electrical system upgrades for the West Goshen Township Municipal Complex. So this was an item that we discussed, was it the last meeting?
Yes.
The last meeting. So we reviewed Carroll Engineering proposal related to taking a look at the electrical infrastructure associated with the complex here and understanding what a future state might be in terms of electrical vehicle charging, maybe heat pumps for building heating, power distribution around the site, whether the electrical feed-in was capable, that we have today would be capable of, I think we already know the answer, it probably isn't capable of managing the electrical demands for these other usage, and how that would need to be upgraded. And we looked at the scope of the study, and the board had quite a few questions that we needed to follow up on. And Chris has chased some answers down, and it was in the agenda materials that the board and the public have. So, Christy, is there any headlines you want to share around what you and Carroll Engineering have discussed in the last couple of weeks?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So Supervisor Hellman had outlined a variety of additional questions related to the scope of services. They were included in a separate sheet outlined in red. I took those back to Mr. Peterson at Carroll Engineering, and while not explicitly called out, all the items were envisioned as part of their work, with the exception of the structural assessment for the roof structures as it pertains to potential installation of solar arrays, and grant funding research for EV charging stations, conversion into electric heat or solar energy generation installations. For the first one, I'd given a recommendation at the last meeting, doing the feasibility study to determine if solar is a feasible option, and getting a separate proposal for the structural analysis. I stand by that recommendation. I think it would be good. I think it would be a better practice for us to determine one that is a viable option before we spend the time getting a proposal for a structural analysis. Then we can go down that path in the future. As it pertains to grant funding research, Carroll Engineering does have a whole division that does look at grants. We can also look at things in-house. However, I would recommend we look at the study and determine what projects we're going to do and look at specific grants associated with those projects instead of looking at like a whole laundry list of potential items until we really understand what exactly it is that we're doing. Chairman Walsh, also you asked a question regarding the possibility of installing a battery to store unused energy instead of selling it back to the grid. I spoke with Chris about that, and based on his response, he doesn't see that as a beneficial option for the township. It could potentially be very cost prohibitive and probably not be able to be located on the municipal complex site given the size that he said that they would normally be. Then the final question related to the 55 electric vehicle charging stations that were in the proposal. I spoke with Mr. Woodward. That number came from ChargePoint and looking at the existing vehicle fleet that would be converted to electric vehicles, plus providing additional public charging stations. Is that correct, Dave?
Yeah.
So that's where that number came from.
Dave, is there a breakdown between their assessment of the current fleet, or, which vehicles could be in the near future electric vehicals, and how many charging stations of the 55 were for public use? Do you remember?
No, they looked at our fleet, they looked at our parking lots, and it was kind of a general mix. The one thing that didn't take into account is I envision we're going to need at least one, if not two, quick chargers here.
Mm-hmm.
So that will probably diminish that number quite a bit.
That the need for quick charges, I mean, to me, that's part of what Carroll Engineering will figure out, right?
Yeah.
That's what we're asking them to do, really,
Yeah.
to say, hey, you need so many of these and so many of these type of charges,
Right.
and it'll handle these particular sets of vehicles.
Right. That 55 number was a number we were working with ChargePoint on the first two EV chargers. So it was just an idea, hey, what are we looking at? It was just kind of a ballpark number.
Do we know how often the public chargers are being used and utilized, like at the Tech Community Park or here? Because our employees use the one in this parking lot, right?
Correct. They will use that and they will pay for it. And the one for the police department Tesla that the board approved previously is up and running, so he's no longer utilizing the public ones any longer.
But the public charging stations are quite well used.
At the park?
And we have a screenshot that we can look and see how much charging is going on and all that.
I had to submit since we got that grant from the state through the diesel settlement with Volkswagen, we had to submit a report on their usage, the energy usage, and how many hours. So they are used pretty significantly.
Okay. I'm bringing it up sort of because when we were at PSATs, I went to sort of one of the forums about electric vehicle charging, and they really were talking about the importance of getting these quick chargers because people are more likely to charge their vehicles like really quickly, and sort of they don't have to go out of their way to charge their cars. I know that we're sort of bound by needing to install them on municipal property, so we can't necessarily put them, out of Wawa or something. But I think it would be a good idea to explore more quick charge options for people. Like if they're going to the like their kids' baseball game.
Very expensive.
I know they're expensive. How long does it take right now for the ones we have at the park to charge someone's car?
The chief.
It's about 25 miles an hour.
25 miles an hour.
And that's the use, the charging stations like at the park
Yeah.
are for somebody that goes there and they're going to have lunch, they're going to walk around the trail. So
Right.
it's not to charge the vehicle back to full.
Yeah.
It's to keep it full.
Right.
But Dave, just to remind me, if we wanted to add more public charging stations at the same time at the park up here, we're already running up against a problem with the power supply, right? We've got to end up with a new feed into the park.
Well, the community park we have, that's its own service, so we can put a couple more on that line. Pico actually dropped a brand new service for us that's just for the charging station.
Okay.
The public charging stations here, we're maxed out.
Yeah.
We're going to have to look at doing something different.
But let's just let's imagine the future 25 years down the road, and we want the majority of parking spots to be able to charge. I'm just making this up, maybe we never go there, but there's definitely break points around how many of these charges we can have.
Yeah, but then the technology is ever changing. There's one company out there, I just read a report on, that they actually have a disc that you actually embed into the blacktop. So when you pull in the park, the system knows your car, it's already charging your car, it's charging you, it knows that Mr. Walsh pulled in.
But I have any money, Dave, I can't.
Oh, no, they've got you on the app. But that's kind of where we're going with this.
But what are people gonna, this might seem like a weird question, but like, what are people gonna do while they pull into our parking lot and charge their car for half an hour?
We see a lot of cars come in and charge here. People come in around lunchtime and you'll see two cars. One car will come in and park and charge. The person will get the other car, and I'm assuming they go to lunch. Because a half hour later, they come back and get the car and they go.
And I think they're
That's
capped.
their behavior.
And I think they're capped at 2 hours. I think it automatically shuts off.
Yeah, we automatically shut off in 2 hours.
I have a question regarding, obviously this particular proposal does not cover, as they say, detailed design services, bidding services, construction phase services, submittal data review, additional meeting, site inspection, public and regulatory and agency meeting attendance, which could be considerable amount of money.
But that's not what we're
I
here
know,
for.
but my question is, will this, what we're doing here in the scope of work, result in a cost estimate for all of these items?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
But not necessarily for all those level of detail, it's about what is a phased approach to upgrade the electrical supply to this site so that you can ultimately provide, in a phased, staged way, a series of electrical vehicle charging stations as you replace your fleet, as you want to add more public charging stations. As the heating systems for buildings reach the end of their useful life, we want to be able to have the option to go to heat pumps potentially. So it's going to, I hope, lay out a plan as to how the size of the power system you need and the set of projects you could do over time. It's not going to have an individual estimate, but these two projects, if you do them together, cost you this much. Here's all the breakdown of all these individual costs. It won't be that level.
Okay.
The way I envision this is going to be, result in a report that's going to be a tool for the township to utilize for budgeting purposes.
For future.
Exactly.
And phases.
And for us to incorporate into our 10-year capital plan.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions on the proposal scope of work?
I just want to say we do have Henry Alexander here from the NCC committee. Is there anything you'd like to add, Henry, relative to this?
No, thank you, no.
And I did send information to the SAC, including the scope of work questions that were posed at the last board meeting.
I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the proposal here to go ahead and authorize Carroll to pursue this.
I'll second that.
Could I ask to modify the motion to make it a not to exceed $17,900 as
Yes.
stated in scope? And just for the board's awareness, this is over budget compared to what we initially put in the 2022 budget. We are having a mid-year budget review at the August 2nd meeting. I'm talking with the finance director. Given the movements of both revenue and expenses, there's certainly no issue with funding the gap. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there any other board questions or comments?
I just want to say I'm really excited about this. I think this could be a great place for the township to pursue, to move towards, and that's electrification of our facilities. And we're going to have to do it. We need to do this.
Thanks, John. Are there any public comments or questions on the motion? Doug?
What's the gap amount in the budget?
The budget was $12,300. The proposal is not to exceed $17,900, so the gap is 5-6. Margie?
Just a quick question, maybe Dave can answer. I think I remember many years ago hearing that it was already determined that the maintenance buildings, the newer buildings, that the roofs were not capable structural construction.
No, the brand new D building is actually built with, it actually has conduit in place for solar. When that building was built, we couldn't get any grants or anything, so it made the cost of putting the solar system in.
I had thought I had heard that it was supposed to be built to be able to handle it, but then after it was built, that.
D building's designed for it. C building, we'll have to have a structural engineer look at it, but it would probably take it. This building and the police station, neither one could really put solar panels because, believe it or not, there's 3 school bus sized heating units sitting above your head right now. There's really nowhere to put them on these roofs.
Any other questions? Okay, we're ready to take a vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Next on the agenda is item number 7, discussion regarding the formation of a land planning committee for West Goshen Township. And Chris, I believe you're going to lead this discussion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So, over the course of the last couple of months, the Planning Commission has expressed an interest in becoming more involved in the vetting requests that come before the township for items such as zoning requests, redevelopment, kind of be involved from the beginning stages of it. And while they review and recommend subdivision land development projects and land use ordinance amendments, it would be beneficial to have their input early on in the process prior to presentation in front of the full board. We've also been looking internally as a way to streamline this process because from what I can tell, the township is, just based on my 10 months here, the township is really entering what I'll call the next phase of its life cycle, where you're going to start seeing not so much new development just because of the state of building in the township, but more of like a redevelopment sort of phase, where we're going to start seeing these requests like what was discussed back in April with the Quality Inn and things of that nature for rezoning. So and essentially the way the process works right now is we have to schedule numerous meetings and a public meeting in front of the board. And we've been looking internally at a way to streamline this process. And Jamie, and coming from Middletown Township, were facing a similar situation to us. And they had a land planning committee, which I believe was only made up of members of their governing body, which was made up of their council. What we're proposing is to establish a small subcommittee of both the board and the planning commission that would vet these requests in advance of coming before a full board meeting. It would be a land planning committee that would review such items as requests for rezoning of parcels, requests for development and redevelopment of parcels in advance of a formal subdivision or land development application, essentially a sketch plan, and a variance or special exception request before the zoning hearing board is deemed appropriate by the zoning officer. What I mean by that is, for example, something like the shopping center proposal that was reviewed by the board back in May or June, I believe it was, June. That would go before them, but if someone's looking to, as a non-conforming property and looking to like put a deck on, I don't think that would warrant going before this committee. Something more major is what I was envisioning. And the structure that we were looking at would be 3 members of the Planning Commission and 2 members of the board. Planning Commission representation would be the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary, essentially the officers, and the board would be the chair and the liaison to the Planning Commission. I've also written the resolution that's in the packet before the board this evening that would allow, in the event that any of these members are unavailable to attend, the chair of the respective body can appoint an alternate member to attend in their absence. And we set these up as officers because they have the capacity to change on a year-by-year basis at the organizational meetings. The Planning Commission did review this at their July 12th meeting and voted unanimously to recommend that the board establish such a committee. Now, I would say one thing is we do have a couple of, as the board's aware, we do have a couple of projects kind of in the pipeline that we've been talking to that we were going to send to the full Planning Commission meeting. I think we stay on that trajectory and not redirect them to a new committee, but anything new that's coming in, we can direct them to this new body to start the review process. The chair of the Planning Commission, Doug Stewart, is here this evening. If there's anything else I missed or you'd like to add from the Planning Commission's perspective.
Well, the only thing I would mention is you've laid out exactly what the Planning Commission has sought out to achieve, which is to have input early on in the process rather than react to a developer or homeowner's plans that have already been engineered and they're reluctant to make any changes. So this procedure, the whole planning commission endorses, and we're very happy that it's now before you. The only other thing I would like to reiterate is what Chris Baker just said, is that municipalities go through an evolution from rural all the way up to very urban. And Chris has rightfully said that the township is now entering into the redevelopment stage. And that definitely changes the planning, not process, but the issues that will be before the planning commission and ultimately before the board. And so I think we need to recognize that we'll be seeing different types of development or requests for development, a lot of rezonings, special exceptions, unless we don't have very much vacant land. So I just feel it's important to highlight that to the board members. We're very happy to have it before you this evening.
Thanks, Doug. Board questions, comments for Chris, Rick, Jamie, or Doug?
I think it's a great idea. Thank you for looking into this, and Jamie, thank you for the suggestion. It's going to streamline things.
One item I forgot to mention is there would also be township staff representation as non-voting members, which would be myself, Jamie, and Rick.
Chris, do you have any comments, concerns, or questions about this resolution, the process we're planning to use?
Chris had sent it to me and I gave him my comments. The only thing I said is it is a committee, it is an agency under the Sunshine Law, so it would have to follow all those rules, which sometimes can be cumbersome. Advertise the meeting, keeping minutes of it, you have to let the public to participate. So that's something to just keep in mind. I've been before the Land Planning Committee in Middletown on the other side of the table, and it is helpful because it's a small committee. So that was one of my concerns, that there's 5 people and staff. I think that's probably the sweet spot. I would not get bigger than that, because then you're just going to have a lot of different people's opinions and you're not really going to get clear direction. So that was one of my concerns when I was seeing the number of people. The only other thing I would ask, and maybe Jamie can give guidance on this, is so you direct somebody with an idea to go to this committee, what's the next step? Is it they then come to the full board? Do they then go to the full planning commission? Or is that something that on a case-by-case basis the land planning committee will decide? I don't know if you guys talked through that.
I think it's case by case. I know in Middletown it certainly was, and it just depended upon what kind of decision and feedback they got from that committee. If they were willing to make a zoning, amendment change for whatever the development proposal was, then they certainly have to, take those steps and introduce the amendments and go through the planning commission first, right? So it just depends on exactly what the proposal is. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where the land planning committee will advise what's the next step.
Yeah. And there'll be regular reports from this committee, from that committee to, like a liaison from that committee will report back to the board. Is that the intention?
And the way we talked about structuring this, because we had an internal meeting to talk about structuring. One of the ways that we talked about structuring it was having this committee, since the planning commission meets at 7, this committee could maybe meet an hour beforehand and meet at 6 before their meeting. That way, this body can report to the planning commission on what was discussed, and then at the subsequent week, the liaison from the planning commission can report to the board on what was discussed.
So let's say they're in their meeting and there's a project that's being proposed, and everybody on the committee votes, because it's going to be a voting committee, to not recommend the rezoning to the board. Does the liaison from the board or whoever still come to the full board at a public meeting and say, here's the project we looked at, and we as a land planning committee decided not to recommend this, but we still have public discussion about the project itself? And is the representative from that project going to be present at that meeting?
I think that would depend on a case-by-case basis. I could envision, and Jamie, correct me if I'm wrong from your experience in Middletown, I can envision a lot of cases where if this body does not recommend something, they're going to go back and retool it.
or withdraw it, because a lot of times they're under agreements of sale and they have a defined due diligence period. And if not getting a warm and fuzzy feeling from this committee that, you know, it's going to have a lot of recommending power, so to speak, they may not be willing to put in more time and effort and money, and the seller may not be willing to grant an extension of time. So I think that's really going to depend upon.
I know, I guess my concern is that we're only going to have 2 members from the board that are going to be hearing these. And what about the other 3 members of the board? What if members have different opinions about whether to?
One of the good things is in terms of how your meeting structure is laid out. If something comes, let's just use for an example the August 9th Planning Commission meeting. The board approves this resolution and we get started. Something gets heard on August 9th. It's reported back on August 16th. The other 3 members of the board say, "Hey, we'd like to see that. We can schedule it for the first meeting in September." They don't have any veto power, but at least you then know their recommendation before you're scheduling them to come present before you.
And I would say, actually, to that point, and this isn't meant to be rude in this comment, but if you're not willing to delegate to a committee to sort of be the first door, you shouldn't create the committee. Like if you, and that's totally your prerogative, and that's one of the big hats that you as supervisors wear, and that's really to vet these proposals and decide whether you should give direction for an applicant to move forward and spend a lot of money and time. So I think in Middletown with the 7-member council, it's a little different because it's such a large council.
I do have a little bit of pause about giving the power to veto a project to this committee and not have the entire board of supervisors be presented with all the information. That does give me a word on that.
I understand. I understand that. I don't think they're going to be. I think what we can do is we can structure it in such a way where there's instead of like trying to like rush things through, we can structure it in a way where the land planning committee gives a recommendation, it comes back to the board the following week, and then the board can make a determination based on the recommendation of the land planning committee if you want to hear more from the applicant.
Yeah.
I think we can structure it that way.
And again, I would just say and I don't typically represent developers. Majority of my practice is sitting on this side of the table, but I would tell you perspective, and I've heard from other lawyers, you know, that they're spending a lot of money and time, and it's still in your discretion. You guys get to call the timeline, but they do want to know in a relatively quick turnaround time whether or not it has any viability moving forward.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I just don't, like I'm going to say again, I don't think that's up to 2 members of the board to decide. I think that's up to 5 members of the board to decide.
If I could add just one thing, I don't want to be under the impression that this committee will act in lieu of the planning commission.
Correct.
My understanding is that what the committee collectively decides will then be taken to the planning commission for discussion, and the planning commission, separate from the committee, will make its recommendation to the board of supervisors. And then the board will take those 2 bodies' recommendations and have whether it be hearing or discussion with the applicant, and then make your own decision.
Okay, so my question was, are we still going to have a public discussion about each of these specific?
I think that's up to the board.
Yeah, I think that's up to the board.
On each application. You know from out of the gate, sorry to interrupt you, out of the gate that this is, you know, there's not 3 members of the board that want to see any more about it, that you just know from the outset this is not good. We don't really want any more time or effort spent on this by anybody, whether it's the land planning committee, the planning commission, or the board. I think you can direct your staff in that direction. I think it's really going to be on a case by case. So let me go back to the example of who I'm representing in Middletown, because it's been helpful. The land planning committee had concerns. We were asking to rezone a piece of land from, I can't remember if it was R1, which is low density, to an R3 or R4. And they said, you need to go talk with the neighbors. So we did. We had a really nice, good meeting with the neighbors, and then we could go back and report. So it's almost like they give the high-level concerns and like, hey, you better think about this, you better think about this, you better think about this. Go back and do some more homework, and then come back to us. So it was helpful to have those, because they are members of the community. You know, you live in the township. You have constituents that you answer to. So it's really good to, on the other side of the table, hearing, like, I wouldn't have thought, you know, to worry about, we always worry about the neighbors, but specifically there was this one particular intersection that's a really bad intersection. So it was good early on before and then the applicant can decide, do we want to spend this time and money and hire engineers and hire lawyers and all that? if from the initial meeting, it's just, you know what, this is not really a great idea.
And I don't know if I presented it clearly enough. The goal is not in any way, shape, or form to cut out any planning commission review or board of supervisors review. The goal is more to get a better, more streamlined way to vet these requests and to allow them to make, any sort of necessary changes in advance of going further down the steps.
Okay.
I feel like essentially what it does is it brings before you a more viable option rather than a shot in the dark. And I wasn't here, so I don't know, but if the Quality Inn came in and proposed, 700 unit apartment complex, then you guys would be like, I don't think so. That's going to generate too much traffic, right? Or whatever the case may be. If that had been vetted through the land planning committee first, and they came in with 140 unit, apartment complex, then you have your discussion, and it's a more viable option to consider. And it's just a matter of getting something before you that's already has those high level things pointed out, like Kristen said, that because you live here, what way things might go, what the huge issue is that might need to be addressed first, and they can go think about that and come back with it more of a solution.
I'm interested to hear what the rest of the board members have. What do you think about this approach? Are you comfortable with this committee handling that back and forth before it even comes to other members of the board? Are you comfortable with that?
I think so. I'm extremely comfortable about it because we're not left out. We're still going to be at the same process. We're still going to have our input. And I like the fact it's being vetted first because there's some things that they'll eliminate. We could be talking about for hours here, but they'll already have eliminated some of the stuff that isn't going to work. So I'm all for it.
And one of the reasons I structured it to allow for not just who's listed on the resolution, but to allow for what I'll call pinch hitters, is that way in the event that, let's say, Sean or John are unavailable for a meeting, Sean would say, okay, Ashley, I'm not available tonight, why don't you come in my place? And that way, any member of the board or any member of the planning commission can be involved.
Yeah, I have two comments or thoughts on it. One is, it's great it's set up that way, but the success of a body to do anything depends on the enthusiasm and commitment of the people to do the effort, to evaluate, put the time in, and go to the meetings and be available. So I just want to make sure that we feel that the Planning Commission representation and the folks on it today all want to step up and have this committee available, to do this. They want to have a bigger contribution than they have today. So I did speak with Doug before the meeting, and he assures me that he believes that there are certainly folks who want to provide that input and make this process work. So I think that's a key factor to the success of it. If we're struggling to get people to attend for whatever reason, or they're not providing their full effort into it, it will be only as good as the commitment that people have.
What's good about a resolution is if that's discovered during this process, the board can easily change that.
Okay. The second point I have, this is a positive about this, is that often when folks come either with a fully baked land development plan, by right use, whatever else, or even with these zoning proposals, we often want a bigger mindset to give input in the sense of, well, we've got issues that we'd like to see relative to landscaping or sustainability concerns, or are you going to put charges in on this and that? Sometimes although they're not required in our ordinance, and that's another subject that we have talked about things that we could or could want to put in our ordinances and improve. I think, most, from what I see, is most developers are they get information early enough about how you might want to shape something. They're quite happy to try to accommodate it versus they come in here with a fully baked, lots of legal costs already baked in, and we say, well, what about this and that and the other? And it's like, well, it's not in your ordinance, so it's too late kind of thing. I think this process gives another chance to shape the proposals to be more fitting with what the board's desire is relative to redevelopment. Any other thoughts or comments from the board? So And we're going to ask now, I think, is there any public comments or questions? We are going to entertain the resolution in a minute. Doug, you've obviously got experience here, so.
The only suggestion I would make is include the resolution. Not only the planning commission make up the chairman, vice chair, and the secretary, but the option for the chairman of the planning commission just to decide that maybe it shouldn't be those members will vote on other persons.
Well, I included in here, we wanted to keep it to.
Yeah, just the three, but they shouldn't have to be the chair, vice chair, and secretary all the time for that year. It maybe just to include there, we'll structure it that way, but give the chair latitude for the planning commission to internally vote on three nominees and like that.
We discussed that, and the reason we went with the officers is because if you're willing to take on a leadership position with the body, there should be some enhanced responsibility that comes with that leadership position. So that's why we settled on using the three officers as the representation of the planning commission. But the exact same language that I just described for the board that allows for, if someone can't attend, to allow for a substitution is shared with the planning commission. So if any of these three individuals cannot attend a meeting, then Doug, as the chair of the planning commission this year, has the option to substitute in another member of the planning commission at his discretion.
We also discussed the fact that if the three officers of the planning commission are the primary members, that besides having like an alternate appointed which somebody can't make it, we also talked about the fact that the next year we may not have the three officers, the same people, and so that role can rotate with other members. And I think that's an important part, so we don't get three members that are always the same one year to year to year.
Any other comments, Margie?
Make a comment about quote leadership on these boards. The way I understand the second class township code is that the chair and the vice chair or the secretary, those roles simply are for these meetings. They facilitate the meeting. Sean has no more power than Ashley and anyone. You're all equal, and this chairmanship is strictly to oversee public meetings. So I just wanted to make that comment because I've seen that, I've watched that over the years. It's like deference is given to the chair.
It's actually true.
Like,
yeah.
Well, but I think, no, I mean, I think the board can, in its own legislation, if they want to delegate more authority as far as administrative tasks or whatnot, I think they have the power to do that. As far as his or her voting power, it is the same. A chairman can't veto another vote. You know, Sean's vote is just as equal as Ashley's and Robin's and John's, but as far as if they'd like to give the chairman additional, discretionary powers, or not really powers, but just administrative tasks or functions, you can do that. I think you can define that in your own code. I don't think you have, but you can. I'm defending against that.
And generally with these subcommittees, in my experience, it has been the chair or the president of the governing body, whatever the title is, who's the representation for the governing body on a subcommittee such as this.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay, is someone like to make a motion to adopt resolution number 11, 2022, to establish a land planning committee for West Goshen Township?
I'll make that motion. Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Is there any final board comments or questions on the motion? Any final public comments or questions? Okay, ready to take a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is item number 8, proposed amendments to the West Goshen Township zoning ordinance. And Chris, we have your name on this agenda item.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So the item, just to put this out front, these have been reviewed by our planning commission at their meeting on July 12th, but they have not been reviewed by the Chester County Planning Commission as required. So the question before the board tonight is to send these to the Chester County Planning Commission for review and comment. So the first is, these are both text amendments to the zoning ordinance. The first is an amendment to section 8437 related to the I-1 Campus Light Industrial District. And this was delete sections 8437B10 and 8437B14. These regulations conflict with other sections, and we don't believe that they're necessary any longer.
John, I can understand why they're there to begin with, to be quite honest. Jamie, just to shed some more light on it, got a zoning certification request. Somebody had a property that they wanted to know what they could do with it, and Jamie called me and said, what does B14, which says the height of a structure, 60 feet minimum. I've never seen 60 feet minimum. It's usually maximum. So she was asking me if I knew how that got in there, and I said, absolutely not. I have no idea. And then as we're looking at this section, we're like, what's 10? Tower and chimney location, 60 feet minimum for any lot line. I'm not sure why that's in there either. So it's one of these cleanups that who knows how they got there or what they were, what they applied to at one point in time, but they probably need to come out.
Okay, staff, you're good with it, right?
Yes. The second amendment is to section 8452 related to sign regulations in the Plant University Main Campus Overlay District. This is the PUC district, and Dr. Julie Dietrich from Westchester University is here this evening. We do have some images of what's being proposed. So Dr. Dietrich from the university had contacted the township regarding the potential installation of pole banners for the university in the South Campus parking lots. We reviewed our zoning ordinance, and it was determined that it was the provisions did not exist, and the university was required to follow the banner provisions currently outlined in the zoning ordinance, which would consider these temporary signs limited to no more than 30 days. Based on our review, what they're proposing is fairly common in a university setting. So their legal counsel did draft some language that we recommended that they prepare for the township's consideration. And we did provide some examples of what the signs would look like. Rick, can you bring those up, please? And this was reviewed by the Planning Commission, who did recommend that it be approved. So these are images of what the signs would look like on the university property.
Do look like.
Or do look like, excuse me. Do look like. They'll be mounted to poles, and Dr. Dietrich, do you have any other comments or information you'd like to present?
Sure. Well, so essentially there would be 54. We're looking through rebranding. And so what we essentially found out in doing our due diligence to say, hey, township, we did the rebranding, we want to replace our banners. And then that's when we realized that there wasn't such an ordinance that allows that. So we're trying to work to do that. So there are 54 locations between the North and South Campus, 46 of which are in parking lots. The others that remain, if you're curious, are up by our School of Music, which is at High and Rosedale, South High and Rosedale. And so these are 18 by 36. And so what I tried to do was make it as clear as possible by circling those X's, those that pertain to West Goshen Township in the North and South Campus.
So 18 inches by 36 inches?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for making sure.
And at what height on the pole are they at a, what height typically they're?
That I do not know.
Are these free-flowing like material, or are they hard material?
They're double-faced fabric.
Fabric, okay. So I guess what I'm saying in the ordinance is, do we need to put something in there as to what the material of it is?
It does. It says in paragraph 10A, pole sign is erected, such signs shall consist of lightweight, flexible, or fabric material. So 10A says that under section 2.
Oh, 10, okay.
Julie, how many of the 55 are actually up to date? Are they all up? Are all 55 up? Or have you got like 30 or 40 up and you want to add 10 or 15 more?
So we're not asking for any new locations, simply so to answer your question, I think most directly, we're either replacing existing ones or where they already have structures in place. So in other words, let's say one got damaged by weather, that we would be putting it in an existing location.
Okay.
That was the other concern I had. If it was damaged by weather, flip into pieces and fall off and all over, is there something like put in there that?
There's probably something in your general sign regulations that already gives you the authority to require them to replace it. Yep.
And this would not, This would only be for the properties that were zoned in the PUC overlay district. So the underlying zoning would not apply. So these are only the properties that have that overlay authority.
So just so I'm clear, just to make sure, so if I have a property on Carter Drive, which is under, zoned underlying the overlay, and I've got a business there, I cannot erect a pole banner up.
Correct. And that's,
They're not in the PUC.
and because the ordinance that was adopted identified specific parcels that were, no, they're not. There was one parcel in the PUC that was on Carter. There was just the university property in the PUC on Carter Drive. Because the PUC ordinance, one of the exhibits identified all the properties that were subject to that overlay. And none of the only properties on Carter Drive. Correct.
And the foundation.
Correct.
The fourth district though.
No, I
Yeah, I
thought
thought
that
there was
the
other
overlay
additional-
goes on Carter Drive like that proposed hotel location.
Yeah,
It's under the overlay.
I think in the PUC 4, I think there is properties that are not university.
The ones I looked at were like the foundation
And
and
Carter
like
Drive.
the facilities built.
That whole area is included in the overlay.
But we could change it to be, it has to be
Well,
on
that's
property
my
owned by
point.
an institution.
Yeah, that's what I would like to see.
Yeah,
Okay.
make sure that that's the case.
So
We'll
it's just
double
so
check
clear,
that.
just so we don't end up with a proliferation of, now I can put banners on poles outside my business.
We could probably, what do we could do? Let's double check what was adopted
Yeah.
with the PUC, and then we could add under item C here, must be owned by an institution of higher education.
We'll use the language from PUC language.
Exactly.
Yeah, use the language. And Tina, just to follow up, paragraph L, I printed the whole 8452 is all of your sign regs. And subparagraph L specifically says, every sign permitted must be constructed of a durable material and kept in good condition for repair. Any sign which is allowed to become dilapidated in the judgment of the zoning officer shall be removed at the expense of the owner. So there is an ability to require that. It comes to Jamie's attention.
And I think it should be, when we start to look at the conditions as well.
Make a motion for each individual one, or?
Well, we're going to, the motion, can we make a motion just to send both of these proposed amendments to the Chester County Planning Commission with the addition of the comments tonight?
And I'm going to combine them into one, if that's okay?
Yeah.
It's easier just for the review and also for the advertising if you ultimately decide to move forward. Okay.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, thank you, Ashley. Is there a second? I'll second. Go ahead, Tina seconded it. So we have a motion and a second. Is there any final board comments or questions on the proposed amendments before they're sent to the Planning Commission?
Just so the board's aware of the timeline, so we'll submit them. The board would have, the planning commission would have 30 days in which to review them under the MPC. Let's say we get the comments back. We're probably looking potential adoption second meeting in September.
Okay, thanks, Chris.
And it'll have to go back to your planning commission because we're going to make a change.
Okay.
Your planning commission will have to look at that change.
Is there any public comment or question? Very good. We're ready to take a vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say nay. The motion passes 5-0. Next on the agenda is item number 9, which is discussion regarding license plate reading equipment and cameras for the West Goshen Police Department as allocated in the 2022 budget. Chris.
Mr. Chairman, before the board this evening is information regarding the license plate reading equipment and cameras that were included in the 2022 budget. There were 2 locations that were identified, Paley Pike and the intersection of Phoenixville Pike and 322. The September 21st, 2021 meeting, the board authorized the submission of a grant application to the PA Commission on Crime and Delinquency for the purchase of this equipment. Unfortunately, the township did not receive the grant. So in light of this, the question before the board is whether or not to continue, is it the township should continue forward with this purchase without grant funding that was envisioned to offset the cost. The amount allocated in the budget was $11,942, but there would be ongoing costs for maintenance for the additional equipment. Our existing maintenance contract is approximately $20,000. Since the police department has identified this as a need, I believe, I correct if I'm wrong, Chief Carroll, we were planning to do these, and then the grant was discovered to kind of to offset the cost outside of the plan. Is that correct?
Correct. We did the grant after we decided we were going forward with the
I recommend going forward with the purchase since the police department has identified these as needed in these locations.
comments or questions on the proposed way forward?
Chief Carroll, can you tell us where the existing camera locations are in the township?
Yes, we have an intersection of Westchester Pike, 5 Points Road, at 202 and South Matlock Street, and at Pottstown Pike and Green Hill Sunset Hollow.
So there's 3 locations there.
Yes. You agree with that?
Yes.
Thank you.
So the maintenance for 3.
So this would expand it to 5, and I believe the Paoli Pike location, I didn't see an intersection, I believe that's right out here at 5 Points Road.
So we're trying to split it, so we can catch both sides of 202, so we're probably not going to do it here.
Okay, so it's Paoli Pike corridor general. Okay.
So I'm not quite clear where the 2 new locations are. It's where is it again?
It's going to be Paoli Pike,
Yeah.
somewhere between the shopping center and here.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
that's
think they
one.
decided the best spot yet, it has to do with the wiring.
Yeah.
And Kingsville Pike at 322.
Okay.
Now, how do you make that determination? What's the criteria where the cameras go, accidents, traffic
No,
violations?
mostly traffic flow and where we think people are best for our search for crimes. People are coming and going from town.
So if there's 3 right now, the maintenance budget is 20 grand. So once we get these installed, it's going to go up by another $12,000, $13,000. So it would be $33,000 in the budget for next year, right?
Correct.
And the $11,940 is budgeted in this year's expenditures.
And you think these cameras do deter people, like your numbers go down because there's cameras here?
I don't know if they deter people, they catch people.
Once they go there, maybe they'll deter people.
Okay, so is there any other board questions or comments? Is there a motion to proceed with the purchase of the 2 new cameras for $11,942?
I'll make the motion. I will second.
Thank you, Robin. Thank you, Tina. Board comments or questions? Last chance. Any public comments or questions? Doug?
Carroll, are these the same kinds of cameras that they put red light? If they have one?
No. No, they're much smaller.
So they're only for reading license?
So depending on the intersection, most of the intersections have cameras that can see the traffic and license plate for cameras, both. But not, they can check speed or, I mean, obviously they see if a car goes through the red light, but it doesn't tell if the car went through the red light.
So is it taking photos of the cars all the time?
Video all the time, yes.
Video.
And how long is that video kept available?
It's an excellent question. I think we do 180 days, but I have to check and make sure of that because I don't know if our storage capacity on those.
Now, would this video be susceptible to right-to-know request?
I don't believe it's susceptible to right to know, but I believe it is for Act 22. And we also utilize this for accident investigations. We supply it. We have a fee set up when we supply it for insurance companies and attorneys for accident investigations.
So could a private individual make a right-to request and get a video during a particular time segment, a particular location?
So right to know requests generally don't cover police video. I don't know if they do LPR video, but Act 22 does, so it would be a different request.
How many requests are you getting from insurance companies for video?
We've gotten a couple, but not that many.
2 this year, kind of thing?
Yes, something. I don't know the exact number. And some of them, like we got one on a pretty bad accident, but there's a criminal investigation going on, so we hold that until we get that stuff.
Okay, any other public comments or questions? Steve, do you have one?
Yeah, so these aren't viewable by the public in general, like PennDOT cameras are?
They're not.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, you're ready to take a vote. All in favor of the motion, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say nay. The motion passes 5-0. 2 new cameras. Great, so what's up next is agenda item number 10, reports for the month of June 2022, starting with police report from Chief Carroll.
Thank you. So for the month of June 2022, we responded to 1,901 calls for service. 44 of those were alarms, and 2 of those alarms were valid. We responded to 55 accidents, 18 of which were reportable accidents, and we drove a total of 17,636 miles. We completed some extra patrols for traffic enforcement on Sunset Hollow Road, Grove Road, South Concord Road, Route 322 bypass, Spruce Avenue, West Warren Road, Airport Road, North Newark Street, and North 5 Points Road. In the area area of training, we did our normal monthly Lexipol training, our PA, BTN training, which is our required in-service training. And our emergency response team is normal 12 hours of monthly training. In addition to that, Detective Edwards attended the Proprietary Detectives training. Officer Ass attended MICSAT certification, which is investigating tractor trailers, motor vehicle carriers. Officer May attended explosive entry certification for the ERT team. Sergeant Coleman attended stress and trauma class. And Lieutenant Cotter and Sergeant Brycer attended the FBI Vita Command training. That's what I have for the month of June. I also have some numbers for the first half of the year. So for the first half of this year, we've done 12,669 calls for service, 277 alarms, 19 of which were valid, 353 accidents, 116 of which were reportable accidents, and we've driven a total of 110,850 miles. I'll certainly answer any questions that you have.
I have a question. So I'm looking at the, I don't know what page it is. It's under the classification of offenses.
Okay, I'll go to that. Go ahead.
So under drug abuse violations, there's two, so B says marijuana and F says marijuana. So they come up twice, well, they all come up twice, I guess. I'm asking what the difference is between the lettering on that.
Give me a second to find the sheet. I have lots of sheets.
I'm also just curious about arrests for marijuana. And I'm speaking openly because we have a marijuana dispensary. I know you need a card. It's just all very interesting to me. How often are people being arrested for marijuana and possession? And
A decent amount. If I can find the sheet, I can probably answer it.
It's not numbered. It's
Can you hold it up so I can see what it looks like?
so it's this.
Is it in the year? I think that's in the other report.
Part two. Just roll those I'm also just kind of interested to see what you guys are seeing out on the street as far as drugs and what's going on in that.
So we still get a decent amount of marijuana. It's probably the biggest arrest because it's the most prolific drug. The biggest thing you'll see is, at least in Pennsylvania right now, you can't smoke leafy tobacco or leafy marijuana. Even though you can purchase it, it's illegal to smoke. So that will be the biggest offense we're going to see in that area. Still get plenty of the opiate, heroin, and related pills. That's probably the biggest problem we have right now. Meth has been creeping in the area a little bit for the past several years, and that's something I hadn't seen in my entire career around here. Very few, but that's starting to build up.
You see a lot of fentanyl.
Yeah, mixed it in. When I say heroin, it's fentanyl and heroin both side by side.
So with the marijuana offenses, they're being arrested and taken into our police station for processing. And then what happens?
If it's just their possession, they get released on summons and have a court date.
I have a question on your alarm summary, January to June. For the total false alarms and the total valid alarms, both with no permit, are they being fined? Pardon me?
I didn't hear what you said. Both are what?
Are they, well, I guess you updated it actually. The total false alarms, no permit, and the total valid alarms, no permit categories. There's 21 and 2, so that's 22 that did not have a permit that had false alarms. Are they fined, or is there any type of repercussions associated with that action?
I'd have to look at the ordinance. I know we get them permits after that, and whether they get fined for not having a permit, I'd have to check the ordinance. I'm not sure.
Yeah, because that's a good number. And that's, well, it's 22. Just
No permit for having the alarm.
yes, you have to have a permit to have.
Well,
the alarm.
if the ordinance requires a permit, then there's probably just a general violation section of the ordinance that the township could, if they wanted to, seek a fine.
Yeah, is that something we would want to entertain?
We may entertain it. I just have to check. I'm not sure.
Chief, I'm looking at the comparison of 22 versus 21 on the year-to-date offenses. I was just going to the Part 1 offenses. It looks like overall there's an increase, but it seems to be driven primarily by thefts. So any kind of reasoning behind why you're seeing that in this township?
I think the biggest reason is the economy. Over the years, when the economy struggles, debts go up.
So the arrests you make, are they typically folks from within the township, or are they folks who are coming here for opportunity?
So the biggest thefts, certainly, I think everyone's seen the catalytic converter thefts. That's the people that we suspected in some of the arrests have been people from outside the area. But one of the biggest larcenies or thefts that we've seen is over the internet or over the telephone, where they're defrauding people, and that's certain people not only come out of the area, but usually from out of the country.
Well, okay.
Identity theft.
Yeah.
When I look at the category of forcible rape, I see we do not have any arrests. Is it because the assailant is unknown or not able to be apprehended, or is it because the victim is not on the press charges?
So I don't know that there's the answer to that specific. I know at least one of those is the victim does not want the press charges, and I would suspect there's a high likelihood that that's the same for the second, but I don't believe that.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yes. Yesterday, Tina Ward Smith and I, board member, met with Chief Carroll, monthly board liaison meeting with them. We had discussion of several topics, and I just want to reiterate, go through them again. Can he give us an update with the memorandum of understanding that with the Chippewa County Hospital, where we stand with them?
There's no update. We have to have no further discussions.
No change?
No change.
So we're still waiting to hear back from them, basically, right?
We've given them our position, and I don't know if we will hear back.
I think it's going to go away, personally.
So what is the status right now of their police force? Originally, they were talking about 12 officers, weren't they? And where are they at as far as staffing?
My understanding is they have hired, the original 4 people they hired are still working there. I don't know that they've hired anyone else, and I don't know that they've gotten any of the other certifications that they're at.
Okay, so basically we're still in limbo as far as they're concerned.
We are. We're operating as normal.
Now, has the number of calls decreased to the hospital once they've instituted this police department, or has it increased?
So the average number of times we've been there the first 6 months of this year has increased very slightly over the average of the previous 6 months.
Do you anticipate this changing with them having hired 4 police officers, and which weren't in existence at this time last year, correct? So I mean, they have an additional police force there. Do you anticipate maybe a less need for West Goshen Police Department to?
It stays its status as right now. I do not.
Okay.
Is it the number of calls, or is it then that has remained, that has gone slightly up, or is it what about the amount of time that an officer has to spend dealing with an issue? Is that the same, or is it less because of the fact that there's presumably resources there to manage the situation?
So I would hope it was less, but I cannot tell you it's less because the officers call us. Because they're very limited on what they can do, even though they are police officers by statute. They're very limited over what they can do. So when they get something, they call us.
And they're new. I mean, they're new to doing it, I'm sure.
Okay.
And can you give us an update on the agreement with the Westchester Area School District regarding the hiring of an additional officer for Pierce Middle School?
There is no update. We've spoken to them, and I've not heard back. So no update.
Okay, so that's also something. There was a resident who made a complaint about the parking situation down there at Barker Park, especially with all the camp use that's being made there at this time of the year. The cars have to be parked along the street. So what's happening regarding that situation?
We've gotten together with Ken Parks and come up with a plan that instead of dropping the kids off from their trips at Barker Park, they're not going to drop them off at the community park, and both Sergeant Kreutzer and Ken felt that would be a problem.
So that situation hopefully should be resolved.
Hopefully.
Next item on the list was there was an article in the Daily Local News on Sunday, which you were quoted quite extensively, concerning the theft of catalytic converters. Are we seeing that a lot in the township at this time?
We are.
Do you find that happening in waves? Can you talk about that situation a little bit?
It comes in waves. We got hit pretty hard with it during COVID when the economy kind of went down a little bit. We went through a time where we were getting hit pretty started to slow down, and then this week it picked up pretty good, so it's up and down.
Are these thefts from public locations, or are they people from private property driveways?
Not usually driveways, apartment complexes, businesses. The businesses with a lot of trucks get into ours.
Chief, what's happening? Go under the car still?
Yep.
Matter solved.
You went under the public to see that?
Where I am in the dark parking lot, no one's there.
Oh, yeah.
The covered trucks mainly, and the Jeeps, anything that's elevated, so it's easier to get up there.
And the last item is, I believe there's going to be an equity mission meeting with the Westchester School District, or in conjunction with them, at the Milton Center on Tuesday, July the 25th. I can't make it, so I'm going to be away. But I believe you're going to make it, Tina?
Yes.
And will you be able to also make that, Chief?
I will be here.
So hopefully we'll be here and report on that, in our meeting in August. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Any questions from the public for the chief? Thanks, Chief. Appreciate it. Okay, we also have our monthly reports from our EMS and fire companies. Does the board have any questions on any of the operations reports for the month of June? I see we have some representation here, so is there any questions for Goshen Fire? Yeah, there is. Chief Grant in the back. Hi. No questions this time?
I do have a question. We attended a meeting on Friday at Good Fellowship, and we were presented some information from that EMS organization. Can we share that information with the rest of the board members?
Absolutely.
Because I think that's something that we need to consider, and we need to have this public discussion about. And I believe that would fall under executive session qualified, so we have to have a public discussion about that. They did make a presentation to those of us who attended. It was Chris Bayshore, Tina Smith, and myself, and they presented their idea for the contract and what that would consist of. So the board should be made aware of that information and their information.
To just to add on to that, the plan that was discussed at that meeting was to take back the information that was presented to all of our respective governing bodies in their service territory, and then meet again in September, just because of the timing of things.
So could you send that, would you have copies of that information from them?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks, John. Any other questions or comments?
I just have one question for Goshen on monthly overview. Automatic alarms continue at a higher rate than normal, 56% for June and 51% year-to-date. Any response to that?
We've had some facilities that have been running at a higher than normal rate. And, we've been working with the codes officials to get that managed. In West Goshen, Pembroke has been a problem this year. Rolling Green Memorial Park has been a problem this year. Their office buildings, or the converted house in the middle. So there's been a few trouble spots. And we go to whatever township would say, we go to the codes department to help manage that. But yes, it's running at a pretty high rate right now.
And the same with EMS, had the second busiest month in history, primarily due to uptake in responses in East Goshen.
Yeah, so...
is there a certain facility or...
Yeah, so Wellington, part of the Wellington assisted living was being renovated and turned into a memory care unit. So they actually had fewer residents there for a pretty significant period of time while they were doing the work. They've started to repopulate that section, and we've started to see those numbers speed back up. Another reason for the increased EMS calls is we run that third ambulance during the daytime during peak periods. When we have 3 or more calls in our district, so we're able to pick up more of those calls as they occur. So we're actually handling more calls because of that as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Just one last comment. Our next coalition meeting is on August 15th, I believe.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep.
So I believe we'll be discussing the grant, their mid-year budget review, and also be looking from you some proposals on what your contract concepts might be for both fire and also for EMS services to our township, separated out. So we'll be looking to hear from you and move in that direction at the next meeting.
Also some examples on maybe formulas that you propose that we can follow with the contract to you. Great.
Okay, thanks. Very good. We're ready to move on to agenda item number 11, Board of Supervisors announcements. Start to my left, Tina.
Yeah, a couple things. I guess on June 28th, we had a Zoom with Dawn Matter, and who's the Director of Equity for West Goshen School District, and Sandra Bradley, who's regarding policing. She talked about policing in Latin America, and Dawn had talked about one of the perspective series on policing in America, community of color, which is a very good presentation that John and I both attended, and we're hoping that she's going to also present that again on August 11th at 6 o'clock at our police community meeting, West Goshen, in this room here. It was well worth going to. Second of all, is involved in police negotiations, of course. And then some of us attended on June 14th, Westchester University event put on by Julie Dietrich, who's here tonight to bring the community together and share some ideas, which is a very good community effort. Also, as John said, we had our second coalition meeting on July 14th. Just to elaborate on that a little bit, some of the things we discussed was the contract, similar to what the borough has right now, to have with EMS and police for everybody in West Goshen. Also, we talked about mid-year budget reviews for each of the different entities. We also talked about the monetary contributions from other municipalities and call volume by territory. And we also talked about great funding and volunteer opportunities. And there were some great suggestions that came out of that. Steve Pellman had some great suggestions that we're probably going to elaborate on our next meeting as to how to recruit volunteers and some of the measures how to do that. Also on July 7th, John and I met with Lillian Baptiste, the Westchester Borough Mayor, just to discuss some various issues, synergies and various things that's going on in the community. We also met July 15th with Good Fellowship to start their contract. And then on July 21st from 6 to 9, I'm going to be attending a pipeline emergency exercise with Steve Pellman, the chief in the borough. That's all.
That's a long list. Thank you, Tina. Robert.
Well, all I can say is I just came back from Colorado, so I really have nothing to say about my announcements.
Okay. Thank you, Robert. John?
Well, Tina ran through the list.
I'm saving it, John.
We don't want to say one. We missed one.
I'll stop right next.
There's only one who missed. And on June the 28th, also we met with Jerry Elizon, who is the president of the state Pennsylvania Fire and EMS Association, regarding the coalition that we've been developing here with fire and EMS folks in our area. He has some really great insights and feedback on what we were doing. So that's anything I have to offer in addition to
Thanks, John. Ashley?
So I was able to finally make it out to the sewer plant for a tour, and I was very impressed with our sewer facility, I have to say. I don't know why it took me so long to get out there. It was very exciting, actually, a lot more exciting than I thought it would be. The COMAG system is really impressive, and it seemed like staff there were pretty happy. Morale seemed to be good. So that was really great. A couple other things. I did have a resident reach out to me, and I forwarded it to all of you about the pickleball lines. He had been requesting, so I had a resident reach out to play pickleball and wanted to know if we had lines. I reached out to Doreen and some staff asking about that. So apparently we do have pickleball lines at the park.
Lambert Park.
So, I mean, his question was, I saw that you guys are going to be redoing the tennis courts at Community Park. would you consider putting pickleball lines on that? And I said, if you're gonna ask for that, right now is the time to ask for that, because we're in the middle of this project. So I just wanted to put it out there. I don't know if that's something that we're interested in adding to the courts, since we're already doing.
We're actually not redoing the courts. We're doing a drainage project next to the courts.
Oh.
So it's just to improve the drainage around
Gonna
there.
be
That's
resurfacing.
because of part of that bigger project, right?
That's the big project, but it's, basketball courts are getting.
Basketball courts.
So we're not doing the tennis.
The tennis courts aren't going to get resurfaced. They'll probably get resurfaced in a few years following that.
Okay.
But I think you got to double check with Ken. They put the pickleball lines at Lambert because of all the tennis use that happens up there.
Okay.
Those 4 courts are full
So
with
this
tennis.
person was not aware that it was there, so I think that they're pretty happy with the situation, and I wasn't aware either, so I'm fine. The third thing I do have to say is that I did reach out to some representatives from Parks and Rec and Sustainability, Chris, Jamie, Ken, about the park master plan that we had all talked about, and trying to kick that into gear. And except for Jamie, I haven't really heard back from anybody, so.
So just an update to elaborate on that.
Okay.
We will not be eligible for VPP funding from the county for park master plan. They do not fund them. And it's truly because DCNR does cover that. So we could apply for a park master planning grant through DCNR. That application process would open and be in April, and then we wouldn't hear back until September of next year. So there's something to consider with that. And then also, I did contact the County Parks Department about the grants for community park, and that's construction only grant, and that application process opens in October, is due in February. You would hear back in June. So you could do a construction grant for DCNR in April again for that as well to match for the splash pad and anything else at Community Park all as one project. So 2 grant applications for construction only, and they would just be staggered, and you would find them out next year as well. So that's kind of where we're at for the grant applications
And
on the horizon.
as it relates to the master planning, that is on the agenda for tomorrow night's Park and Recreation Board meeting. And what we did was kind of the prep of some of the discussion was we extracted out the information regarding public facilities in our existing comprehensive plan for 2019 and sent those along to the Park and Recreation Board, kind of just to start the discussion.
Yeah, my recollection is we are interested in getting these grant applications in for the full scope of the project. So, I mean, hopefully the timeline that you just described fits in with the process that we talked about previously, which was grant application, hopefully awards next year, and then eventually a project in 24. Yeah.
And we are going to update. We are going to update our capital plan to include the full scope of costs that were allocated in Carroll Engineering's proposal.
Okay. The interest in Paoli Pike Park, one over here. So I know we did a couple of things to try to improve the situation. Was it a bench or 2 or something? Yeah. So I don't know if the residents are, if there's anything else we can do in the short term or not, but the Park and Rec Board would consider that if anybody comes to it. That was, we have had a reach out to a couple of residents.
I think we could look at maybe doing some improvements to the basketball court, maybe updating on how the backboards are. Maybe we can replace the backboards and look to see if there's any other smaller facilities we can put in.
Yeah, a gazebo or something simple.
Yeah, we could drop a gazebo in.
Yeah. So just again, I don't know if anyone is attending the Parks and Rec asking for, hey, what else can you do for me or not? But as part of the conversation they're having, at least in the near term, since these other issues are longer term, so whether it's the rehab, the community park project or the master planning, those are sometime on coming to fruition. So there's a couple of small things that could help.
Maybe we get a price for resurfacing the basketball court and give it just kind of like a little bit of a facelift for the time being.
She was mostly talking about the fact that she has little kids and wanted like a little play set. So I don't know if she in particular will appreciate the resurfacing of basketball courts. But I think
Maybe go with some small play set and then resurfacing the court. If it's not people are not using it, then don't we service it?
25,000 for a small place that.
Wow. Okay, moving along. I have a couple of announcements. The Board of Supervisors met in executive session on July the 5th and July the 14th to discuss the contract negotiations with the West Goshen Police Association. John and I met with staff to continue the development of a financial model for stormwater permit compliance and stormwater system maintenance and improvement projects. We will review the work of the board at the August 16th public meeting and continue the public discussion of how to fund this infrastructure need. So, work in progress, but we're going to bring an updated proposal as to a way forward here in a month's time. That's it from me. So next up is Township Manager's announcements.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I will start with the first announcement that came to my attention at about 5:30 this evening. I was notified, just to make the board aware, I was notified by Energy Transfer that they're going to be doing a hydro test tomorrow on the out-of-service 8-inch pipeline in the area. I don't know exactly what all is involved in there. They did say in their email that they notified the residents that were on site, or that were online. Online landowners were previously notified via letter, so they did notify people online. But this just came to me at 5:30 this evening, so I am going to have a conversation with them, making sure that we are made aware of this earlier in the process. But I wanted to make sure the board was aware that this is going to be happening tomorrow. But like I said, I don't know. It's a line that's not currently in service, and it sounds to me like they're doing some kind of water testing just to determine if there are any leaks or any problems with it.
Sounds like they're doing pressurized hydrostatic testing.
Yeah, it sounds like they're going to want to put it back in service, but maybe on a east-west route, like it was originally.
Testing just to make sure.
I know that for our emergency notification system, it's an entirely different thing, and we've been, that that's all played out. And I know that we also send out information regarding trash and snow and things like that. Would these sorts of things ever make sense to say we just found out that Snow's going to be, Energy Transfer is going to be doing some work?
From doing a CTR, I would say no, because that's designed for incident. But when I do get these notifications, we do post information on the website, and we do post information on social media. The issue is I got this a half an hour before walking into this room.
And it's really just a maintenance thing.
And then because
No, just to make them aware.
Yeah, just about activity.
We always want to try and be in front of this. We can't.
As soon as I get these from Energy Transfer, I try and post them up on the website and get them on social media. Unfortunately, this one happened too late. And then I also do notify, because I understand there was an issue previously in East Goshen Township where Derek unfortunately got short end of the stick, we'll say, and was unfairly attacked. And I do also try and notify him whenever I get made aware of these so that he's not blindsided by them.
Thank you.
Is this going to require, or maybe you don't know, any street closures or anything like that?
It doesn't sound like it to me. In fact, the email that I got said no one should even be aware that it's going on. So in terms of my other announcements, our e-newsletter is being finalized and should be going out this week or early next week. Aqua is starting work on Amelia Drive on August 1st. We have posted information on the website. They've provided a copy of the letter that went to the residents in that area. So this is expected. This is a water main replacement project, and it's part of a larger improvement, and it's expected to last through the end of September. But we do have the letter that was provided, posted on our website at the top of the homepage. They're also, in terms of Aqua's easement request that was before the board for 100 Spring Lane or Cooper Smith Park, I did follow up. I sent the request from the board to remove that third paragraph. That was part of the approval. I have not heard back from them. The individual that I've been communicating with said that they didn't think it was that big of an issue, but they needed approval from Aqua. I did follow up with him today, and he still has not heard back from Aqua on that. So I haven't signed anything, but that's still kind of in limbo. Doug had brought something to the attention of the township related to truck shines on Ashbridge Road. Next day after the meeting, Dave went out, looked at them. There was one that was missing, and I believe that has been replaced. That has been taken care of. And the last item that I had is this weekend on July 24th, there will be our next concert in Community Park as part of our summer concert series, and it is the Barbone Street Jazz Band. And then Thursday night we have our next meeting for the COG, and they are going to be talking about EMS.
Who attends the COG, Robin? Is that you?
She'll be away for this one.
Are you attending that place then, or?
With me?
Yeah, look at you, yeah. You have to well list all the things. You're already
Want to add to yours?
No, I'm fine.
It's this Thursday, it's the same night as the pipeline exercise
I'm
on the
going to
fire
get the
department.
pipeline, so maybe you should
Maybe
spend
John,
for me,
you
Sean.
should be.
I'm going again, sure. I won't be.
If anyone's interested in attending, if you or Ashley are interested in attending, just let me know. I'd be happy to send you the packet.
Is
It's
it
Thursday at 6 p.m.
the topic being EMS, is it really regrouping around what's already been discussed here tonight, the work we've been doing with the service providers, or do you think there's anything new here?
I think it's just going to be a general discussion. I believe Good Fellowship is going to be presenting.
I wonder if it's the same presentation that we went to.
It might be. One final announcement I do have is for our paving project, we are going to be undertaking Saturday paving on 5 Points Road between Westchester Pike and Paoli Pike. And we will post information on the website and on social media about that. The reason for the Saturday paving is the traffic on that section of road is so significant during the week that it's more efficient to get it done on a Saturday.
There's no way to safely stack cars. So it'll actually go one way from Westchester Pike to Paoli Pike.
And it just takes one day.
They'll probably be done by noon, 1 o'clock.
Wow.
They have been moving through the paving project very efficiently. Jamie and
These are the same guys that we had the last year, right?
Yeah, the mill crew actually finished today.
I saw, I've been driving that stretch every day.
The paving crew, they're putting down about 1,200 tons a day, which most crews are average around 800. This crew does 1,200. They're looking to be complete by Tuesday, Wednesday of next week.
Is this the crew that normally does penned up roads?
Yeah. Yeah, we actually have a paver they usually use on the turnpike. They're actually paving Suburban Village. They're pretty much done, full width. So the paver extends out, covers the entire road, and just walks right down the middle of the road.
And Jamie and I went out to the paving project in one of the neighborhoods with Dave and Mark, and everything was looking very efficient, being run very well. And speaking to Mark and Dave, we haven't had really any issues.
Okay, don't go there.
Okay, I just jinxed it, but so far so good.
5 points, yeah.
Speaking of paving, I do have one more announcement. Dave, Mark, and I did have a meeting with our state representation, with Representative Aaron and Representative Sappy regarding issues that we've been having with the PennDOT Chester County Maintenance Garage and their lack of responsiveness. We did have a situation on Green Hill Road where we had to involve the police there that had exacerbated into what we would call an emergency situation, and we were not getting any kind of a response from them. Well, our meeting appears to have worked because within days of that, we started getting our issues that we had been reporting to PennDOT for months corrected, such as on Little Shiloh Road.
Yeah, the potholes on Little Shiloh.
That's the one I reported.
They were filled about 3 days after that meeting.
Yeah, that was critical.
So we brought this to their attention, and in short order, they started getting those things addressed, and we're actually starting to get responses. We get responses now from PennDOT. So whatever we said and whatever they said to them must have worked.
It makes a liar out of me. They told me it's going to report it, but it's going to be 6 months to a year before it's fixed.
And we had been reporting it probably a month before you said anything.
Yeah.
The thing that brought this to a head was the situation on Green Hill Road. We were getting no response. Rick and Dave went out, and it had turned into a situation that was a significant hazard.
What are you talking about?
There was an issue on the side of the road in the fog line where if that had been exacerbated so long that if a car hit it, there would have been significant damage that had occurred.
The roadway had actually eroded out past the fog, past the pipe culvert.
So this was what kind of brought the whole situation to a head because we had been reporting the situation to PennDOT since March. and getting no response. But we finally got a response, and on that evening, we actually got an emergency crew out there to do something about it.
Are we still using the same petroleum substance that we were using in the past for the asphalt combination? Because they changed it a couple times, didn't they?
Well, we're using a war mix formula. We've been using war mix, I think this is the third or fourth year for it.
Oh, okay. So it hasn't changed.
They got away from the hot mix super pave
Yeah.
to this war mix.
Okay.
It seems to be a little better because the hot mix super pave does not hold up.
That's the one that's on my shoes.
Yes.
It's holding up there, right?
And my favorite part.
Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you, Chris.
Quick question. One of our prior meetings, we talked about amending the plastic bag straw ordinance. Where are we at with that?
We received the information from Dr. Melanie File on the balloon film extrusion process that Ari recommended. Unfortunately, we got the information later than anticipated to advertise for tonight's meeting, so our goal is to advertise that for consideration of adoption at the August 2nd meeting.
And then enforcement will start 30 days thereafter?
Correct.
Is there a plan to notify companies that are using that?
Yes.
Okay.
We're aware of 2.
2? Oh, yeah, it's like we have another one this week.
Okay. We are aware of 2.
Any other questions for the township manager? Very good, thanks, Chris.
You're welcome.
Rick, township engineers announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In light of the stormwater that we've already discussed, I have nothing to add to that, and there's nothing remarkable to discuss about Redstone at this point, unless anyone has any questions.
Does anyone like any questions, Rick? Item number 14, zoning officers announcements. Jamie.
Thank you. Before the board is an application that will go before the zoning hearing board on Monday, July 27th. It is 25th. Sorry. It is for an application for a zoning variance for a deck and patio proposed that will extend 7 feet beyond the setback line on this property. The rear yard is 20 feet deep. It is in the R3C zoning district. I've provided a little bit of background on the R3C zoning district, which was an infill zoning district created in 2019, I believe, and it was the intention to take a kind of characteristically older neighborhood with smaller lots and smaller homes, and allow for basically the building envelope to be extended just a little bit to kind of try to avoid some of the variance requests to accommodate accessory structures within those lots. What has occurred with this zoning district being put in place on a lot that's been redeveloped now into 11 homes is that presently new homes are built much larger, and they build out the building envelope with the home, therefore leaving much less space for accommodating any accessory structures. So even though the rear yard is 20 feet deep, with the actual structure being built at the building envelope line, it only allows for about 5 feet of patio or deck on that structure. Therefore, you can't really build a patio or a deck in those 5 feet, and they're looking for zoning relief.
Now, don't they have to get, if they wanted to build larger, I understand that, but don't they have to come back to the township and get that approved if the plans change?
So what they've built is within the zoning, it's zoning compliant as it stands without any accessory structure. The building is allowed to be within that building envelope. It meets all the setback requirements as they are set forth, but it doesn't allow for any extra space for any encroachments into your rear and side yard. Our zoning ordinance allows for a deck or a patio to be within 15 feet of the rear property line. So if you have a 20-foot rear yard and you build up to that, there's your 5 foot. You have to still be 15 feet from your rear yard. So you are only permitted 5 feet in this instance to put an accessory structure.
And they knew that when they made that decision to make the building.
They should have.
The house line.
Yeah.
That's what's in the code. That's what we have in our code.
So that is Goshen walking.
Yes.
So does that mean that anyone else who wants to do this is going to have to apply for the same?
It's not necessarily every single, when actually looking back at the plan, it does look like out of 11 homes, at least, in my estimate, at least 5 to 6 knew, secretly that they are to build a patio or a deck. It's not every single one of them, but they certainly, there's more than one. There's more than just this one.
So are all the homes the same design? They're just filling, they're all the different designs?
No, different designs.
Different square footage and all
Yes.
too.
And each lot is shaped a little bit differently. So although the setback requirements are the same for each lot, there's a slightly corner lot that might accommodate a little bit.
This is lot 10.
Lot 7. This is lot 7.
Yeah, that's small lot.
Yeah. This is lot 7. It's one of the smaller lots out of the ones that I took a look at. Believe it or not, 4, 5, I think, 11.
This is the page.
7, 8, and 9, I think were the ones that, there was just, it was at least.
Yeah, but 4,
half of
3,
them.
2, and 1 could never do this, right?
Actually, there is space, I think, on 3
Maybe
and
1.
on 2. It just depends on exactly where they situated
And the way
the house.
the building's slanted probably too.
So HOA open space.
So the recommendation here is to send to the zoning hearing board our solicitor and staff to oppose the variance. Is that correct?
With at least 50% of this new development having this issue, I would say that you're going to keep seeing these requests. It's likely that you'll keep seeing them, and that you would.
Okay, so
you might
because
want to
it's not
consider
just
that.
one lot out of 11,
It's not just one. Yeah.
it's multiple lots would have this issue in terms of accessory structures and their walls. It would be a problem to keep granting them. That's fully foul of the zoning we approved for this. Is that right?
Yeah, it basically.
So board questions or comments around the information, the recommendation?
I took a drive to the neighborhood, just looking at this situation, and those houses that are being built there are just, they're really out of place with the rest of the neighborhood, and they're just almost like overtowering them. And this intrusion of this deck, I get what they want to do, and I can see why they would want to do it. But by the time they finish bumping out there about the 12 feet they're talking about, it's going to be right almost from the property line to their neighbor. It's really fit,
Be entertaining.
Well, yeah.
I like the phrase you used to look, we approved this development and the builders chose to fully utilize the building plot, put the structure up for the property and therefore constrain the purchaser from being able to do this type of things, and that's part of the consequence of selecting and buying the property.
And then you might get complaints from the residents if they're so close to each other. If somebody's in that party, till 2 of them.
Yeah,
They're going to call the police to say, you call the police to say we're having noise here, do something about it. If you put the deck there.
They made the decision.
They made the
Well,
decision.
now you're potentially increasing the footprint of the entire development if everyone wants to put these decks
Right.
on.
They're all going to come to us.
Yeah, I would just say that be careful. I don't totally agree with everything you're saying. I would be worried that people are going to do it regardless. So I think you're going to have to make some, drive through the neighborhood to make sure, because people want to be outside, and they probably got sold a bill of goods. So the developer completely screwed them.
Chris, have you run into this issue before relative to
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what is it, a typical position is for the municipality to oppose the...
Yeah, I think Jamie's right on. If you don't do anything and no neighbors come, zoning hearing may grant it, even though they don't meet the elements of variance. And then you have, even though each zoning case is judged on its own merits, it's hard to deny it if your neighbor 2 doors down got the same relief and has virtually similar facts. So again, I think, I wouldn't doubt that the developer probably told these lawyers, sure, you could always go ahead and apply for a variance, not a problem, I mean, I don't know that for certain, but yeah. They used every inch to build a big, big home.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Okay, then we're looking for a motion to authorize sending our solicitor and the staff to oppose this variance request at the zoning hearing board on July the 25th. So I'm going to make that motion.
I'll make the motion.
Okay, thanks, Ron. Is there a second? I'll second it. We've got a motion and a second, so is there any other discussion from the board? Is there any public comment or questions? Doug?
I would agree, because Rick may concur, when the developer came in for that, the houses were supposed to be more like suburban village. They then chose to put in designs that ate up the whole setback.
Any other public comments or questions?
Well, just a quick comment. I do remember I was on the planning commission and the developer came in and wanted to change the zoning to special zoning to allow to go from a buy rate, which only would allow 5 houses at that time in that space, and it would allow them to do 11 houses. So they were granted that accommodation, thinking that they would match what was in the rest of the neighborhood at the time. That's not what they did. They came in here and built the same size houses as they would have done if there was probably just allowed to do 5 houses in that property. Now we can see what happened.
So we're ready to take a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0. Just one follow-up comment. So if at the zoning hearing board the variance is denied, would it be sensible to send a letter, communication to all these property owners of the 11 new homes and say, please be aware of this situation, that you have to comply with accessory structures and these particular limitations on them? No?
I mean, you don't want to deny the ability of somebody to file. I think the word will get out that, your neighbor got denied, it's not worth it.
I'm responding to your point that if we don't do anything, could happen anyway.
Are all 11 lots sold? Yeah. I mean, honestly, when we called the council, we're representing the applicant tomorrow, they very well may withdraw. I mean, they're going to have a tough case. And the homeowner may, if their lawyer is honest with them, to say, you're really having a tough case now when you have opposition, and we really can't meet the variances. It's self-created, right? So it's going to be a tough case. I mean, a lot of times when we do this, when we represent the municipality opposing it, the applicants either withdraw or modify to really, in this case, there's really not a modification that could be viable. So that may happen. But yeah, I think we should think about that.
If they're denied at the zoning board, what is the next step of recourse for the homeowner? Would we go to Court of Common Pleas?
They can appeal that, yes, but then it's just based on the record, and that's why we'll make sure we cross-examine them very well on the elements and call Rick or Jamie and probably Rick as a witness.
Yeah, that's the purpose for recommending sending Rick to the meeting as well.
When you say the regular anyway.
I meant I would just be concerned that, especially in someone's backyard, my old house, I was in West Whiteland, but we looked at that. We wanted to build back, but we couldn't because of setbacks. And knowing the law, I was like, I'm not going to bother with, But I sold that house, and people that bought it, built one. So people will, if they really want it, they may just not get permits and do it. So I just think they just have to be cognizant of somebody building without any permits.
And then what can you do?
Well, then cite them, then they're violating your zoning code and your building code, and there's significant fees and fines, yes.
And they have to take it down.
Oh, yeah. Or pay $500 a day for every day that remains. And I'm not suggesting that, I'm just saying that that's something I would, people want decks and patios, so you just have to, and, to Sean's point, maybe get ahead of it and just remind them. These are the zoning, maybe you can do it in more just a reminder that these are the area bulk requirements that apply to your development and doesn't really leave room for accessory structures.
I think that's a good idea, I honestly do, because, you know, you have contractors out there that are telling people too, you don't need to go through the permitting process, it's just gonna be long, they're just gonna deny it, just do it anyway, and then we drive.
This lot owner is probably $2,500 into it or more between the engineering
We don't
and
want
the
people to get
lawyer.
that far along with the use,
It's
so
a good point.
particularly as John said, look, you know, what was built has occupied the space that people, you know, would potentially use for accessory structures, so I think it'd be worthwhile. Again, we can wait till the zoning hearing was concluded, see what the situation is then. If the application is withdrawn, I still think it would be worthwhile to send a communication to the property owners. So I'll leave that one with you, Chris, okay? About communications. All right, so we're on to agenda item number 15, approval of the Board of Supervisors meeting minutes of June the 21st and July the 5th, 2022. Is there a motion to approve the minutes? Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you. Is there any corrections or adjustments needed for the minutes? Awesome. Good job. Okay, so a motion and second. Is there any public comment on the approval of the meeting minutes? No? Ready to take a vote? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed say nay. Okay, meeting minutes are approved. Next is approval of the Treasurer's report dated June the 30th for the General Fund, the Sewer Revenue Fund, the Waste and Recycling Fund, and the Capital Reserve Fund, and the bills to be paid in these funds. Is there a motion to approve the bills to be paid? I'll second the motion. Is there any comments or questions about the bills to be paid?
I just saw the SPCA was another $702 this month. I love it.
You can always bring it up next year, T. Put it in the budget.
I'm just gonna bring it up so you don't forget about it.
Okay.
$700 will be on her mind.
Can't wait till your dog gets out and gets picked up. Okay, is there any comments on the bills at all?
She'll find her way home. She'll always find her way.
I'll go get her first.
Are there any public comments or questions about the motion? Okay, ready to take a vote. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say nay. Motion passes 5-0. Can I have a motion to adjourn the meeting? Second, thank you, John. All in favor of adjournment say aye. Aye. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Are you trying to
So I'm doing one night with you. So we'll all be like
Yeah.